is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive 10-game slate presented by Yahoo Fantasy Sports. I'm Dave Loughran. Hit your boy up on the Twitters at Laffy_D. And while you're there, say hello to Adam Scherer at Ship My Money DFS, along for the ride today, providing you some hard-hitting analysis. What's going on, brother? You got some back problems today?
Yeah, not mentally ready to do this show either.
Why? Because of back tightness?
No, I mean, it was just all of Ben Simmons' excuses that I was sending to you and Jordan for.
Oh, is that what you? Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah,
I didn't
think Jordan would. I figured you would.
I was preparing for the show, and I just like reading it out, and I was like, well, first of all, Jordan's not producing today, so why did you include Jordan in this? And it just all makes sense now. Okay, I got you. So you are okay. You don't have any back tightness. All of that was a sham.
Yeah, just excuses to not work. But no, I'm feeling good.
By the way, you guys have to go look at this Marine that thwarted a robbery in like a gas station. My sister sent me this, and she goes, because she's watched our shows before, she goes, it looks like your friend Adam. Now, usually Adam would disagree that anyone resembles him even slightly, but I sent him the picture. Dude, striking resemblance between you and that guy.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
You know what? Maybe you got some secrets hidden from us. Tyler should find it and throw it up on the screen. I mean, this is good stuff. But anyway, we got 10 games to get into. We are happy to have you guys with us, as always. And, well, hit that thumbs up. Can we just knock this straight up over 100 out of the gate? We got 300, almost 350 watching. It's an early start today, 4:45. And for those of you guys that are new to the channel or just need a refresher on NBA, when we have 10 or more games, we're going to do an hour, 15 minutes, because we want to make sure we get you everything we possibly can here and not leave any stone unturned. So 100 likes, let's go. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Help us get to 70K. It's going to be free regardless. If you don't want to subscribe, cool. If you do, helps us out a ton. The YouTube algorithm looks fondly upon those who get more subscribers at a quicker rate and, of course, more likes, of which we just hit 100. Thank you. And if you want to join the channel, get the custom emojis, those sweet badges, and we'll always answer your questions first. And, of course, hit you with the shout-outs and read your comments. Hopefully, they're good comments. But if you want to click join down below the thumbs up, you can do that too. Again, if not, no harm, no foul. All right, man, let's dive into this. First question I always ask you before we get started, starting to get back into the routine of things now. Looking at this slate, 10 games. I had a hockey game on Wednesday. I didn't get to play. You told me when I asked you today, I was like, did you see ownership where there's 4 rookies on DraftKings in the top 9? You said, yeah, but did you see Wednesday? I said, no. And then you proceeded to say that rookie pricing was so bad that it was just an absolute disastrous mess across the slate.
Yeah, so there's still soft pricing today, particularly on DraftKings, but definitely a step in the right direction since Wednesday. You do have more potential value opening up, and especially in the mid-range, with the news that Bradley Beal is trending towards out. That's a big change in the slate from this morning when Josh and I did the strategy show. He was listed as questionable, just assumed he was going to play, but reports now are that he's unlikely to play. Already seen people talking about it in chat, saying like, does it make it likely the game blows out? It makes it more likely. But the game still has a 1-point spread. If you're doing things like saying, oh, I'm not playing Sabonis because the game could blow out, you are going to kind of run into the issue where you never play any player ever because the game could blow out. So not something that I think you should be overly worried about.
All right. So let's dive straight into it. And I guess one more question. Have you considered, and I don't know if you've built lineups yet, but when we did the show on Tuesday, it was a shorter slate. We were talking stars, scrubs throughout. Can you go with a good balanced lineup today? Are there still enough cheap players to where the stars and scrub makes the most sense? Like, where are you settling in at from what you're seeing early on?
Yeah, you can go pretty much any direction today, I think, because the mid-range, there's a lot of underpriced guys in the mid-range, whether, just off the top of my head, Christian Wood, Nikola Vucevic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 3 of the most popular guys on the slate. You have Sabonis and Harden that are $9K and $9,300 on DraftKings. But then you also have really good pay-up options with Jokic and Embiid in particular. You have some value opening up in Washington, not necessarily the safest, but you do have some close to 3K guys there. You have some other, 4K to $4,500 guys you can use. So I think the roster construction is pretty wide open today.
All right, let's kick it off. Indianapolis. Sorry, I'm still in football mode.
I'm pretty sure every single one of us, like you, me, Josh, Eric, have all done that already this season.
Okay, so it's so making the transition, man. I don't think people know how tough it is when you're talking about it. It's difficult. But it's not like I'm building a spaceship. It's just I can't say words right. Indiana laying 1 point on the road against Washington, 227 total here. Let's kick it off with Domantas Sabonis, who it feels like kind of every single. And Tyler, by the way, did you? My fault. Did you just add that, or did I miss it? Charlotte and Cleveland. Charlotte, my fault. Laying 2.5, 225.5 total. We'll kick it off with this game, I should say. LaMelo Ball to kick off his second season, Adam, just went nuts. Only 29 minutes played, but 31, 9, and 7. Filled up the stat sheet, 7 for 9 from 3 as well. And what price does he get to where we don't want to roster him anymore? Because he's still mid 7K on DraftKings.
Yeah, it's not this price, especially because he's not projected for much ownership. And, I understand why he's not getting a lot of ownership, just because there are so many really, really good options in this price range. But that makes me like him quite a bit in tournaments right now, the way things look. I ran a quick crunch before the show just to get some idea of where, I might be getting to in tournaments on DraftKings. And Ball was one of the spots where I'm getting to a lot of them. We only have him projected for 5% ownership. You have Terry Rozier expected to be back in the lineup today. I don't think that makes a huge difference for Ball. You can kind of, like going back to last year, you can sort of run searches for any number of guys on the floor with him, whether it's Hayward and Rozier, one or the other, whatever you want to do. He's still really, really productive because he scores, he gets rebounds, he gets assists. It's not like adding one guy to the floor like Rozier is going to take a lot of production away from Ball. If his ownership stays where it is at 7,700, I love him in tournaments just for the upside he gives you. The only real concern that I have about him is, like you said, he played 29 minutes last game. He lost a couple of minutes to foul trouble at the end of the first half. So I think he at least, typically would have played 30, 31. But if he's only going to play 30 or 31 minutes for some reason, it becomes even more difficult for him to, be the best option to win a tournament when he's competing with so many guys in that price range. They're going to play 4 or 5 minutes more. But I don't really think there's any reason that he's necessarily limited there either. So, if he can get the 33 minutes or so, I think he looks really good.
And right now we're projecting him for very little ownership. It's actually shocking how unowned he is. The highest owned player right now for Charlotte is Gordon Hayward, and that's at sub 8%. Outside of that, Adam, there isn't a single player projecting for more than 0.9% ownership on this Hornets team.
Yeah, it's I think it's a good tournament team, particularly LaMelo and Hayward. It's not a team that I really come close to in cash games just because there are better alternatives. But I think in tournaments, especially, LaMelo, especially Hayward, these are guys that have very high ceilings. They both, Hayward averages about 1.05 fantasy points per minute, Ball's at about 1.25 fantasy points per minute, and they're just not getting much ownership.
All right. On the Cleveland side, Darius Garland, questionable to play. Do you have him in?
I have him in right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He had that sprained ankle in the first game against, was it Memphis, right? So we'll see. I guess at this point, though, it probably doesn't make a huge difference. This has been a team essentially for the past year and a half that has gotten very little ownership game to game, and nothing's changing here. I mean, aggregate ownership on Cleveland, it's possible that even on a 10-game slate, this could be the lowest of any team.
Yeah, they're just one of the most correctly priced teams. This is one example. Evan Mobley was $4,500 or $4,100 on Wednesday. Now he's $6,900 on DraftKings. He played a ton of minutes, played like 38 minutes, but I don't expect that to be a nightly occurrence for him. I do think he's a good fantasy producer, but at this price tag, it's really tough to get there. The only guy that I'm really getting to any of right now in tournaments is Lauri Markkanen at 5,200. He did play a lot of minutes on Wednesday. His production is typically inconsistent, but if you're going to get, let's say 31 to 32 minutes of Lauri Markkanen at 5% or at $5,200 and relatively low ownership, I do like that play in tournaments. But again, it's not something I'm looking at in cash games, not a spot where I expect to get tons of exposure to this team because they are relatively expensive. If Darius Garland were to sit, it starts to look a little bit better for Colin Sexton. It certainly looks better for a $5,300 Ricky Rubio, assuming he would slide into the starting lineup. But operating under the assumption that Garland plays, I don't have much here outside of some Lauri Markkanen.
All right, so let's keep it going because I want to we're obviously going to spend more time on the games we like better. The Indiana Pacers, This was strange to me. And actually, I saw also that you wrote about it in the deep dive, which is free. And I'm not kidding when I say you're not going to get a free article as in-depth as this any day of the week. You're not going to get a premium article that's as comprehensive as this. Definitely check this out. So you and I have said that we've been doing shows together for what, like 4 or 5 years now, right? That Rick Carlisle's rotations have never been easy at all. What do you make of the fact that we saw a super short rotation and huge minutes on opening night for the Pacers?
I was pretty surprised. I had expected a 9-man rotation there. He only went with 8. And so that's obviously a good sign going forward. There's no guarantee that you don't get any minutes going to a 9th guy tonight, but at the very least, it would be kind of surprising if you got, a full extra guy going out there and playing like 12 or 13 minutes.
Even if you did, you're still probably getting like 36 minutes from your main starters.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not going to just start projecting Brogdon for 40 minutes and Sabonis for 40 minutes, but assuming they're going to play, at least 36 or 37 with the upside for more, it just makes them look really good with how tight that rotation was. Sabonis also getting the backup center minutes behind Turner. That's always nice. You've seen in the past his production drop off a bit when he plays with Turner, but it's more so an issue when the Pacers would run the rotation where Turner's the starting center and then Goga Batadze's getting like 14 backup center minutes. And so you end up having Sabonis just not really getting any run at the 5. If Turner's going to play, 26 to 30 minutes, you're still going to get like half or 40% of Sabonis's minutes at center, which is going to make him look really, really good. We don't know the pace really that Washington's going to play out this year. They were one of the fastest teams in the league the last couple of years, but new coaching staff, no Russell Westbrook. You expect that they'll probably slow down, but I still don't think they're going to be a very good team defensively. I think Sabonis should have his way against this interior, and he's not expensive at 9K. So I think he looks like a very good option. Currently in my DraftKings cash lineup, not guaranteeing he stays there, but certainly on the short list. Tournaments, he's a good option. I think there's enough alternatives today that you certainly could get to some other guys if you want to for ownership reasons. But in terms of just upside and salary and projection, he looks like one of the better power forward options.
Did you see how many rebound chances he had last game?
No, I did not.
30.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Malcolm Brogdon had 23 potential assists in the same game. Sabonis only 5 potential assists, but I think you see that come up. The thing too about Turner is like, Turner's just never been a good rebounder. He's never been great shot blocker, not a great rebounder, but the usage really was interesting in that game. It was 28% usage to Sabonis, 25.3 to Brogdon, 21.5% to Duarte. And then everybody else was just kind of hovering in that like 17, 18% range. You're obviously going to see Domantas Sabonis and Brogdon putting in a lot of the work here. And then Duarte, who you mentioned was super cheap last time out, has seen his price come up. But from an overall usage standpoint, especially given some of the guys that remain out for this team, you're probably going to continue to see that. Now, does it make any difference to you because TJ Warren is out, we don't know when he's coming back, Jeremy Lamb, Torrey Craig, Justin Holiday, all of these guys are questionable. I don't know if they play. Does that make any difference to you from a depth standpoint tonight?
No, not really. You're not really looking to get the Holiday anyway. So I'm not too worried about him. I think Jeremy Lamb and Torrey Craig are both reasonable value options. I was getting to quite a bit of Jeremy Lamb in the crunch I did before the show, just because he's not likely to get much ownership. There's cheap players that are going to be a lot more popular, but as a result of that shortened rotation, he played 24 minutes against Charlotte. He closed in a competitive game there. And he is someone that we know can stuff the stat sheet, get rebounds. He can score a bit. It's not a good rebounding team. It's not a good rebounding team in Washington. So I do like Jeremy Lamb at his price tag. Torrey Craig is a reasonable option as well. I do give the edge to Lamb just because he's a better scorer.
Would you say there are priority options for the Pacers tonight?
Yeah. Sabonis, Brogdon.
Both of them.
Particularly Sabonis.
Especially early in the season, getting these type of minutes, it's really hard to ignore that. Anybody else for the Pacers? What's that?
Sabonis stands out in particular.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, listen, even if they play 36, 37 minutes, that's a lot of run against Washington. Like you said, we don't know what the pace of play is going to be like, but I can't imagine with this roster that they're going to be, 2015 Memphis Grizzlies either.
Right. Like, even if you call them an average team, I still don't think they're going to be
right.
very good defensively, and they're not going to rebound very well. So it still looks like a good spot.
Well, let's talk about Washington then, because right now Bradley Beal is, I think we could consider him doubtful, right? From the sound of it. If Bradley Beal doesn't play, you no longer have Russell Westbrook. Even guys like Rui Hachimura are not in the starting lineup or are not active whatsoever. Like, what does that do for someone like a $5,600 Spencer Dinwiddie tonight?
It's going to make him look good. Right now, we have Dinwiddie and Kuzma projected as the top two highest owned players on DraftKings, and I think it makes a lot of sense because you're just taking a ton of usage out of the lineup, for Beal. And with Dinwiddie, you can get an idea of his level of production. You can go back to when he was on the Nets and you take Kyrie Irving off the floor. James Harden wasn't there yet. He had a 30% usage rate, a 35% assist percentage. There's no real reason he can't have those same rates here with Washington. The only question mark, I think, for Spencer Dinwiddie is how many minutes is he going to play? Because obviously he's coming back from that partially torn ACL last year. In the preseason, he played 21, 22, 25, and 26 minutes. Opening night against Toronto, he played about 26 minutes. That was a game that in the second half, it was non-competitive. So I think if it had been closer, maybe you see a couple more minutes for Dinwiddie. But my concern is, is Washington going to just say, okay, go play 34, 35 minutes? Even if he plays, let's say 29 or 30, I think he's a very good option at 5,600 just because you're expecting him to essentially carry the offense. But assuming he's going to play around 30 minutes, he becomes someone where I'm going to roster a lot of him in tournaments, but, probably closer to the field. Whereas if I thought he could actually play, or if I thought it was very likely that he was going to play 34 or 35 minutes, I would end up just playing him in almost every lineup. So that is the one concern I have, but it still makes him, he still looks like a very good option just because his price tag's so cheap.
It's a great point and a valid concern. I mean, he did close that game out because Toronto started making a little bit of a run, right? I think he played the final 3 minutes, but to your point, they were up by 29 in the third quarter. Right. So is it possible that Dinwiddie could, like, in all seriousness though, even if this game's close, you're probably looking at 30 minutes. I have a tough time getting to 35 minutes, 34 minutes for Dinwiddie tonight.
That's where I'm at, especially because he only played 12 minutes in the first half. And, exactly. Washington went on a run in the second quarter, but for most of the first half, it was a competitive game. It's not like this was, some 40-point laugher right out of the gate where they just rested him for some reason in the first half. It's just not to say he can't go play 34, 35 minutes. I think it's much more likely he plays around 30.
What about Kuzma?
I think he looks great. He has an opportunity on this team to contribute more in the way of rebounding. You're getting minutes at the 4 as opposed to playing alongside Anthony Davis and, whatever gigantic center the Lakers are using at any given time. So the rebounding numbers should be better for Kuzma. He's going to be able to get more shots up. He had a 23.5% usage rate in game 1. Now we assume you take Bradley Beal out. If you go and look at Kyle Kuzma over the last couple of years when LeBron James and Anthony Davis haven't been on the floor, he has a 24+% usage rate. So you combine that with what I think is going to be an increased rebounding percentage. He played about 34 minutes in that opener as well, 34.5 minutes. So I think he also is just very underpriced for his role and the potential for increased usage without Bradley Beal.
Do you think Aaron Holiday starts tonight?
That's my guess. If looking at Washington's rotation in that first game,
all the backup minutes.
Yeah, Wes Unseld ran one of those rotations that's really nice for fantasy, where everybody had a backup. Nobody played multiple positions. So you had Aaron Holiday as the backup to Bradley Beal. I assume he is going to start. It certainly could be anybody because you can slide Kuzma to the 3. So, and KCP to the 2. So in theory, it could be Avdia, Holiday, Neto, Bertans. It could be literally anybody, but based on how the rotation went, my assumption is Aaron Holiday.
Okay. Is he viable?
Yeah. Yes and no. So he's 3,300 on DraftKings. He's a good point per dollar option if he starts. I would assume he can play 26 to 28 minutes, particularly if he's playing well. I don't think he'd have a very long leash. If he's playing poorly, there's a lot of guys Washington can use in place of him. So I wouldn't say he's safe, but he does open some stuff up for you if he starts. What really will matter to me, though, is right now we only have him projected for 2% ownership, but he hasn't been announced as the starter. If he's announced as the starter in a game with a 227 total at 3,300, that ownership's going to come up quite a bit. If Aaron Holiday is getting a lot of ownership, I will gladly go somewhere else. You can even go to other guys on this team and sort of, hope that the rotation breaks your way. So when I ran that crunch with Holiday at 2% ownership, I got like 22%. But just to see what would happen if I changed him to even 10%, then I ended up getting around the field. So it's just not a spot where I love Holiday. If he's low owned, then I like him. But overall, I just don't feel very strongly about him, but he is a good point per dollar value.
Our boy El Negro Loco News God says, hey guys, real quick, Spencer Dinwiddie over under 8.5 assists. Sounds like a big number, but I guess like Bradley Beal had 10 potential assists last game, which seems quite a bit for someone like Bradley Beal. Granted, Russell Westbrook isn't there anymore, but do you see Dinwiddie with the over 9? My only concern is the minutes that we talked about.
I have him at 7.8 assists in 30 minutes.
So slightly into the under.
Yeah, but that's if you agree with me on the minutes. If you're watching the show and you're very confident that Dinwiddie is going to play 34 minutes, then I think it's an over.
Anybody else on Washington stand out to you?
Yeah, I'll just kind of quickly touch on the other guys, I guess. This is a very good team to be using rules on because there's a lot of different ways this rotation can go. For one big question is, does Washington go with a 9-man rotation or an 8-man rotation? If they go with an 8-man rotation, then any of KCP, Howell Neto, Denny Avdia, Davis Bertans become good tournament plays at low ownership because they're all close to minimum salary. They all would have the potential to play, 24, 25 minutes. My best guess is that you add Corey Kispert to the rotation, their first round pick. He plays something like 8 to 10 minutes, and it makes it so those guys are more difficult to get to. But still, you would have, kind of like I was saying with Aaron Holiday, where if he plays well, he can play 26 to 28 minutes. If Davis Bertans is knocking down shots for once, they're going to need scoring with Beal out. If Bertans is making shots, there's plenty of minutes for him. Same goes for Denny Avdia. Howell Neto at times can get hot. So I still think that in large field tournaments, sort of rotating through any of these sub 4K guys that the Wizards would like to make some 3-pointers, sans Beal, I think is a good way to go. And then even more so, I kind of alluded to it when we talked about Holiday. If Holiday is announced as the starter, and let's say his ownership jumps to like 15, 16%, I think using guys like Bertans as leverage that potentially could steal some minutes, Neto, another one, is a pretty powerful move in tournaments.
Just curious, what makes you think they could go with 8 when they played 10 in the first half last game?
Oh, sorry, 9 or 10.
Okay. Got you. That makes sense. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, but basically my point was, does somebody replace Beal? Like, does Kispert get minutes?
Right. Or does he just run the guys that he had? Exactly. Right. Okay. You chopped one of them out of it entirely. I wasn't sure if I was missing something, which happens frequently. Let's take this super chat and then we'll talk New York Knicks and Orlando. Corey Randall, thank you, sir, says, thoughts on Montrezl Harrell over Gafford, Adam?
I mean, it's kind of a weird way to word it because like neither of them are getting much ownership, and I think they're very similar.
So it's basically just thoughts on Montrezl Harrell.
Yeah, I think they both have very high ceilings. I think they also have pretty low floors. The issue is that there's so much opportunity cost at center today because you have the two studs at the top. You have a very, very, very strong mid-range. Harrell and Gafford are both guys that they produce at a high rate when they're on the floor. So I don't think they're bad tournament options. They're just not priorities for me because there's only so much exposure to go around.
Our latest update has Harrell at 16.5% ownership on DraftKings and Gafford at 7%.
That seems insane to me.
Right? So really the question would be Gafford over Harrell. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm below both of those, but
it does seem like a lot, right? Because how much listen, Harrell is a good per minute guy. And, he's been stuck in strange rotations throughout the entirety of his career. His best time was the pick and roll days with Lou Williams off the bench, right? But at this stage, like, how much does Bradley Beal being out really help Montrezl Harrell?
It shouldn't matter too much. Like he's going to get usage with that second unit one way or the other. It's not like it opens up minutes for him. They're not going to just start playing a bunch of Daniel Gafford alongside Harrell. So to me, it's still kind of just the same spot for Harrell. He can absolutely dominate in 24 minutes, but the problem you run into is that Harrell's just one of those guys where, assuming he's going to play around 24, 25 minutes, he can give you 35 fantasy points. That's obviously good, but it's not something that I want to be jamming into a ton of lineups because I think a lot of times when the slate plays out, the winning lineups are just going to have like 2 50-point centers, whether that's Valanciunas, Vooch, Embiid, Jokic, Robert Williams. There's just so many so many good centers. And then also there's value centers. If you wanted to save money at the position with a relatively high upside, with relatively high upside guys, there's $3,600 guys like Derek Favors that you can go to. They're not going to score the same raw points as Harrell, but it opens up more elsewhere in your lineup. So it just becomes difficult for me to get a lot of him.
All right, let's talk about the New York Knicks and the Orlando Magic. Awesome double overtime game the other night. New York Knicks 8-point favorites against Orlando, 213 total. So not projected to be a high scoring game whatsoever. Actually, I want to start in a stranger spot here and get your take. With Nerlens Noel and Taz Gibson both out, can we be projecting Mitchell Robinson for, I'm just trying to get a better idea of the rotation here. Mitchell rotation for a heavy allotment of minutes again. And since I didn't get to watch this game, was Toppin getting the backup minutes, or was he coming in whenever Mitchell was out and Randall would shift to the 5?
I don't know who was technically playing the 5, but Toppin was coming in for Robinson.
Right. And I'm pretty sure he played almost all of the minutes that Robinson was out. So
yeah, it also depended on the half. In the first half, Jericho Sims was the backup to Robinson. In the second half, Sims didn't play any minutes. Obi Toppin subbed in early. You had Robinson play about 24 and a half minutes in regulation. Toppin played about 27 minutes in regulation.
What do you think of Robinson today? No ownership whatsoever, but always a good per minute guy if he's not in foul trouble.
I have a really, really difficult time getting there. His per minute production really took a hit once he started playing alongside Julius Randle.
That's true.
He's like the fact he only played 24 and a half minutes in regulation last game concerns me. He wasn't dealing with foul trouble. He had one foul. Sorry, he had one foul in the first half, subbed out 3.5 minutes into the third quarter. Not really sure why. Played a 5-minute stretch in the fourth, didn't close the game. So it's just tough. Even if you were to play 28, 30 minutes, it kind of comes back to the same issue that I was just saying with Montrezl Harrell, except Harrell produces at a much higher rate. So does Daniel Gafford. So I have a really difficult time getting to Mitchell Robinson. And
there's some good centers on tonight's slate as well. Do you see yourself getting to Randall today at 8,500? He always seems just egregiously underpriced given the usage and assist rate and rebound. I mean, he does everything, right? He's a legitimate triple double threat to do so at a couple times every month.
Yeah. And shockingly, he's playing huge minutes for Tom Thibodeau. He played 35 minutes in the final preseason game, followed it up with 36 minutes in regulation last game, 46 total minutes. He looks good. It is a kind of crowded power forward position at that price range. You have Randall 8,500. You have Jason Tatum at 8,800. You have Domantas Sabonis at 9K. That is one reason why I mentioned when we talked about Sabonis, I think he's a really good play, but at his current ownership projection, I don't mind being under the field just because I want to be able to keep some exposure for these other guys like Randall, like Tatum, and then obviously other price points too. So I think it is a pretty crowded top of the power forward position. Randall is a very good option here. I think around 1.25 fantasy points per minute, facing a weak Orlando team. I like Randall quite a bit. Anybody else you want to get to for the Knicks? Not really. I'll mention RJ Barrett just because he's relatively inexpensive for someone playing 36 or 37 minutes. But on this particular slate, there's a lot of options I prefer. I was honestly surprised to see Barrett getting double-digit ownership. The guy he is not a particularly good per minute player. I know obviously Adam pricing comes into play here and he's not expensive, but I don't know. Barrett has not been efficient and he's somebody, he was playing big minutes last season too. So I don't know, but yeah, Thibodeau will kill Julius Randle if it's the last thing he does. I mean, him and Scott Brooks have a lot in common. What about the Orlando side of the ball? I will list just a couple of injuries for those of you guys that are just starting fantasy basketball tonight for the first time or haven't been paying attention to news. Gary Harris is out. Okeke is also out. Not huge news by any stretch, but I think Gary Harris probably would have started if he was active. So what are you doing with Orlando? Yeah, Orlando is a mess. I mean, they have some good value here. In particular, Jalen Suggs, still only 4K on DraftKings. He played about 30 minutes last game, lost a couple minutes at the end to garbage time. I think you could see 32 minutes from him here. The issue is just Orlando's likely to be one of the worst offensive teams in the league. It's a tough matchup against the Knicks. Suggs, last I checked, he's projected for 25% ownership. This is someone that I like using him in cash games. I think that the minute should be there. I think the price is good. In tournaments, though, I'm not that scared to get away from him and just allocate a lot of that exposure to other players. I don't need to necessarily take any one guy at 25% in that price range, but I can just take, more KCP, more Jeremy Lamb, more, there's a lot of guys that you can rotate through. So I'm not that scared of Suggs burning me on this slate, but I do think he's a good cash play just from a medium projection standpoint.
Are you mostly off of Orlando?
Yeah, I think they're one of the most unappealing teams on the slate. I will throw Mo Bamba into that center conversation. He's only 6K. He played about 28 minutes last game, if I remember correctly. I'm pulling that back up now. 27.2 minutes. He closed in the blowout. He also dealt with some foul trouble, only played a 3 minute and 22 second stint to open the second half. He subbed out early in the second quarter as well. So if you're going to get around 28 minutes from Bamba with the potential for maybe more, we have seen him, just how high his ceiling is, and he's not projected for a ton of ownership.
Anybody else for Orlando?
That's pretty much it for me. Franz Wagner went from 3K to 4,500. He led the team in minutes played. He also had the lowest usage rate of any player in the rotation. So that's a pretty tough sell for me. It's pretty much Suggs and Bamba. Suggs more so in cash games, but fine in tournaments if you're contrarian elsewhere. Bamba more so as just a contrarian tournament option.
Okay. Let's talk about Brooklyn and Philly, but first, it's Yahoo Fantasy Sports. I'm assuming most of you guys that hadn't signed up at Yahoo yet and heard about the promotion that we were running with them have already done so, because you got 2 free months of Awesemo plus Platinum, every single thing on the site, right? If you missed it, if you missed the 2-month promotion, we're still doing 1 free month of Awesemo plus Platinum. That's a $90 value if you haven't signed up on Yahoo yet. And it's really simple to do this. All you have to do is use the link in the description below. That's it. Sign up, deposit $10 or more, and enter a paid contest. Now, when you do so, I'm pretty sure they're going to give you $10 back anyway, so it's essentially free. When you do that, sign up and enter a paid contest. They'll send your information to us. We will contact you with your setup information to set up your new Awesemo Plus Platinum account. That's ownership, player projections, boom bust tool, top stacks, lineup builder. If you want to get the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well, you can do that. All of these tools built by Awesemo himself, #1 ranked DFS player out there. I'm telling you, you got it. It'd be silly not to take advantage of this. And I don't just say that because I work for Awesemo. Like, it is really one of those promos that I don't really know if we're going to do it again, in all seriousness, but it's free. It's essentially free. So if you've never been in a position yet to sign up and get a full month of everything on the site, basketball, baseball, football, hockey, MMA, PGA, NASCAR, all of that stuff, here's your opportunity to do it at basically free of charge. So, I mean, take advantage of that. You got the $125,000 baller on Yahoo tonight, and it's definitely softer than other sites. There's no doubt about that. It just is. Everybody wins $15,000 one. That's only 50 cents to enter. So if you're working with a smaller bankroll, there's great contests for you over there as well. And then the $50,000 free NBA Yahoo Cup, that's round 2 free roll. There's just a lot over there. Use the link. Tyler Zander, producing the show, will throw it in the chat as well. Take advantage of it, and we will hit you up after you sign up, deposit, and enter a contest for your way to get your account set up and get that free month of Awesemo Plus. Oh, and last thing, use the promo code Curry if you already have Yahoo, but you want to check out Awesemo. Awesemo Plus Platinum the entire week. All the tools built by Awesemo himself, #1 ranked DFS player out there. Curry, the basketball player out there in Golden State, CURRY, awesemo.com/promos. If you want to get half off a week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. All right, Adam, let's keep this moving here. Brooklyn and Philadelphia. Kyrie Irving, we know what's going on with him. We won't be seeing him on the court tonight or presumably anytime soon. But you have James Harden and you have Kevin Durant, both of whom are priced at $9,400 and $9,300 respectively on DraftKings. That is a price right there that is going to pique many people's attention. And what are we doing with them? It's a 10-game slate, but my God, those are some good price points.
Yeah, very good price points on those guys. Coming for me, I'm coming in around the field on Harden, a little bit lower on Durant. But I think it's just one of those weird situations you get into when there's a lot of mispriced players on a slate of this size. Obviously, James Harden is a fantastic play at 9,300 or 9,400. Obviously, Kevin Durant is a great play as well with, Kyrie out. These guys are going to have their minutes staggered, so they're playing around 33% of their minutes without the other one on the floor. Even when they are both on the floor, they're both productive. Overall, I'm expecting around 1.4 DraftKings points per minute for Durant. I'm expecting around 1.5 DraftKings points per minute for James Harden. The issue you run into is that they're both getting ownership, and it's not to say that they don't deserve it. They do, because if they weren't getting it, I would be playing tons of them. But there's just so many alternatives that you can go to. You just typically are going to see concentrated ownership on a few guys, even if there's a lot of good plays. You go back to Wednesday's slate, you saw that where Dinwiddie was like 48% owned or something on a slate where, yeah, he was a really good play, but there were a million 4K guards you could play. So I think it's a spot where very clearly they are good options. I'm not saying don't play James Harden at this price. I'm not saying don't play Kevin Durant. Just pay attention to, pay attention to your lineup. Make sure you're not just playing all of the most popular guys on the slate, because there are some low-owned guys with massive ceilings here that you're going to want to mix in.
It's funny because on DraftKings, you look at the price points. You have 1, 2, 3, Harden and Durant are priced third and fourth respectively, but they're pretty significantly below Jokic and Embiid. If you look over on Yahoo, Kevin Durant is the most expensive player on the slate. He's tied with Jokic. So I'm not saying it's slate specific, Adam, but there's no doubt that these guys are better priced and worse priced on certain sites tonight. This isn't just like across the board type thing, I would say. Yeah,
for sure. And I think that's a good point, because it kind of sucks, because on DraftKings, you really want to play these guys, but there's also a lot of ownership there. So like the edge to playing them is minimal. On FanDuel, you can do the pay up to be contrarian thing, but I also don't like, from a ceiling standpoint. Yes, Durant can go out there and give you a ridiculous game, but from a even remotely close to average standpoint, Jokic just produces at a higher rate. Embiid produces at a higher rate given their current situations. So it's almost like it would be really, really tough to get them even at low ownership.
So are you on anything else for Brooklyn before we touch on Joel Embiid, who is still questionable in the Philadelphia 76ers?
I mentioned earlier when we talked about Harrell that there were actually a couple of cheap centers that if you wanted to, take a chance and go for value at the position. Nick Claxton's one of those guys. He's 3,800 on DraftKings. He started the last game, played 24 minutes. He had an okay game. It was good point per dollar wise, but certainly nothing that's going to win you a tournament. The reason I'm interested in Claxton is with James Harden on the floor, going back to last year, Claxton has a 19.5% usage rate. If you watch that Milwaukee game, Harden was just trying to get lobs to Claxton over and over and over again. It wasn't successful. I don't know if it was just, a familiarity thing, or if Harden wasn't on his game, or if Claxton wasn't, or whatever. But if Claxton, we know Claxton already has a history of producing at a high level when he's on the floor, then that's have an incentive to improve him and have him be a key piece of their team by the time the playoffs come around. If James Harden is going to try and turn him into his, Clint Capella, that's really valuable at 3,800. And it's just the type of spot where I want Nick Claxton in my lineup the first game he looks like Clint Capella, not the second game when everybody's already seen it. So it's not a great play or anything. It's not something I expect to have tons and tons of, but I do think he's got a really high ceiling for his price tag.
So do I. Now, on the other side, you have Philadelphia, Joel Embiid, questionable. He was playing well last game. Like he had 41.5 fantasy points in 26 minutes, but Furkan Korkmaz hit 4 threes in the span of 2 minutes in the early fourth quarter. Game got out of hand. Him and Maxey just took over. So he never came back. Neither did Tobias Harris. But it feels like this is the type of game where Joel Embiid to just dominate if he's active and not limited. And I'm assuming in the event that he's active, they're only 3-point dogs here. I don't see any reason he would be limited this early in the season if they're willing to put him on the court.
Yeah. In the crunch I did before the show, and, again, this will change as ownership updates, and I rerun everything, but Embiid was my highest owned center on DraftKings. I had about 30%. We have him projected for 3%.
Yeah. Wow. That's wow. Okay. Way above the field.
Yeah. I mean, it's risky in that there's a good chance if you roster Embiid, you still get beat because somebody out of Vooch, Valanciunas, Williams, some mid-range center scores like 50, Embiid gets 60, and it's like, oh, cool, Embiid got 60, but I wasn't able to get some other expensive player with him. But he's insanely productive without Ben Simmons on the floor. Going back the last 3 seasons, so since the start of the 2019 season, about 1.65 DraftKings points per minute with Tobias Harris on the floor without Simmons. Last year in that situation, he averaged 1.7 DraftKings points per minute overall without Simmons, not worrying about Harris. Embiid averaged 1.85 DraftKings points per minute with a 43% usage rate in 450 minutes without Simmons on the floor last year. Just a massive ceiling for him. This game is likely to be competitive. I'm not expecting him to play as many minutes as somebody, like Vooch or even Jokic. I have him in for 32 minutes, but I think the ceiling's really high, and I just absolutely love getting to somebody that I think can legitimately go get 70 or 80 fantasy points at sub 5% ownership.
70 or 80. I mean, that's a bullish take right there. I love it.
I said 10 get.
You said you're projecting him for 70 or 80.
I did that with Giannis once, and then he actually got there.
I mean, look, when you're dealing with these type of players, there's no reason to believe they can't. And Ben Simmons, as you pointed out, Adam, just not mentally there yet, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And he's got the back tightness. I'm sure he's been lobbying to get his own physician to check him out. So the doctor's like, yeah, he's not right, as he pockets $100,000. But the absence of Ben Simmons is really significant here. I mean, Simmons is a good rebounder. He's a good passer. Joel Embiid only played 26 minutes and led the team in potential assists last game, albeit only 6. But Maxi's not a traditional point guard that you're going to expect to get 15 assist opportunities per game. It does feel like, and I'm not going crazy here saying Joel Embiid is going to be a triple double threat every night, but it does feel like he will be able to stuff the stat sheet even more, even outside of scoring with Ben Simmons off the floor. It just makes sense.
There's a lot of people that for whatever reason think Embiid is either hurt or isn't playing or is limited. If he plays, there's no reason to think he's limited. He was questionable last game too. Embiid is going to be questionable. Probably, what are there, 80 games in an NBA, 82 games in an NBA season?
Yes. He's
probably going to be questionable 68 times this year. It's just what they do with Joel Embiid. If he plays, there's no reason to think if this game's competitive, he's not playing, low 30s in minutes.
And he came back.
Right.
When he suffered that injury where his knee was hurting him or whatever it was, he came back and played. The only reason he didn't play was a blowout in the fourth quarter. So I don't know. I expect him to play. 274 likes. We got 1,700 people watching. That's a 16% ratio. It's not awful. I mean, I've seen worse on Josh's shows, but I would love to see what we could do. Maybe just almost double up. 500 likes. You haven't hit that thumbs up, do so. It's basketball season. It's the time of giving. And all you have to do, give us a thumbs up. And if you hate this show, hit the thumbs down twice. Got to hit it twice. Subscribe to the channel as well. We love you guys. We love doing this stuff. We got almost 2,000 people watching on a Friday night. So let's keep it going. Where do you go with Tobias? Where do you go with Maxey? And pretty much everybody else here in this, every non-Embiid player for Philadelphia?
I like Harris. He's projected for a lot more ownership than he had last slate. He was one of my highest owned guys at 7% on Wednesday. Was pretty disappointing that he didn't play the fourth quarter after he scored 41 through the first 3. He benefits from Simmons being out. One negative for Harris, I thought there was a good chance that Harris and Embiid would have their minutes staggered. They did not in the first game. So almost every minute that Harris played, with the exception of a couple, was with Joel Embiid on the floor. That's still fine. He averages about 1.12 DraftKings points per minute alongside Embiid without Simmons. But it would be better if he was playing with the second unit, because then he averages about 1.25 fantasy points per minute. So that's one negative. But at his salary, I don't really care all that much. The only real consideration for me is the ownership. It's just a stacked slate. So I think Harris is a good play. I'll just want to make sure that I have some contrarian pieces in lineups. Tyrese Maxey, I feel a little bit differently about. I think he's a good value, but just based on the fact that, point per dollar, he's starting, he's likely to play 34 minutes or so, and he's still relatively inexpensive. But I thought he was over-owned last slate. He was doing okay, and then basically just went nuts in the fourth quarter when he got to play without Embiid and Harris. Every single one of his minutes prior to the fourth quarter was with both Embiid and Harris on the floor. Going back for as long as Maxey's been in the league, when he's played alongside Harris and Embiid without Simmons, he averages 0.75 DraftKings points per minute. If you take that over 34, 35 minutes, that's a good point per dollar projection. But I think he's going drastically over-owned as a result of, one, people not adjusting his rates, because we know when Maxey is out there running the show, he's very productive. But I don't think people are giving enough credit to the fact that he's not running the show with Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris on the floor. And then also the fact that he ended up having a good game last time out in large part because of what he did in the fourth quarter. I just think that he's going over-owned. It's somebody where if he was at low ownership, then I would love to take a shot on him. But right now he's projected to be popular. I think there's a lot of alternatives I'd rather get to. On DraftKings, I actually think he's one of the most over-owned players on the slate.
All right. So priority options for Philly as it stands are Embiid and Tobias.
Yeah. Embiid by in terms of wanting to be over the field, Embiid by a wide margin. Over the field on Harris too. I have 38% right now. And then Maxey, like I said, if Tyrese Maxey scores enough points that I have to have him at 5,300, I'm probably just not going to win today.
Yeah, that's fair. The price point, and you mentioned from Wednesday, he was 4K, but there were also a ton of 4K options. Now he's up around 1,300, or he was 4,100 or something like that. So yeah, that's a pretty big price hike and a lot of ownership on a 10-game slate. Anybody else from this game?
No.
Okay. We had a question in chat. Is there any free content today? And everyone said, yeah, you're watching it, which is true. But we also have Adam's Deep Dive. It's the most comprehensive. It's the best article you're going to find. Daily breakdown every single day over at Awesemo.com. We have the NFL rankings are free today for Sunday, NBA ownership rankings, NHL top stacks, and MMA pro plays. So yes, we got a lot of free content today over on the site that is usually behind paywall if you want to check that out. And again, if you want to actually get access to everything, use the promo code Curry, get you 50% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Let's keep it going here. We got 4 down? Did we do 4 games? All right, probably time to speed it up a little bit, but we'll get there. We always do. Let's talk about Toronto and the Boston Celtics coming off a 2 overtime game. First time out, Jaylen Brown. Well, you know what? We'll wait to get to them. Started with Toronto. Siakam's still out for a few weeks, Adam. Expected to be out for a few more weeks. So what do we expect, and what did you learn from this rotation after the first game?
So I think Toronto is a pretty interesting team to look at tonight because they got just destroyed by Washington. They really disappointed. They, were really popular. They let a lot of people down, but there's some good things to take away from that game. I think, for one, Fred VanVleet was really popular. He let a lot of people down. He took 20 shots in 35 minutes. He just only made 5 of them. He had an absolutely awful game, but this is someone that last year we saw get a nice bump in production whenever he played without Pascal Siakam. I expect that you see that again here. It's a very difficult matchup. I don't think he's a particularly safe play, but he's still a strong option at his price tag. So I like VanVleet. Scotty Barnes, I think, is one of my favorite value. Actually, I know is one of my favorite tournament values on the slate at 4,500. He jumped $1,100 from last slate. His performance last time out was okay. He was fine for his salary. He wasn't great for the slate. And then now he gets a really scary matchup against Boston. The reason I like him so much is that he really did everything that we were hoping he'd do in that game against Washington from an opportunity standpoint. He had a 23.5% usage rate. He played 32 minutes and dealt with some foul trouble. He was 3rd on the team in potential assists with 5. He was 4th with 10 potential rebounds. The only guys that had more potential rebounds were Birch, Achua, and OG Anunoby. So that was kind of the thing that we were expecting coming in. He might not be the highest usage guy, but he's going to get some. He can, make plays. He can rebound. He can do everything. And we saw him play a bunch of minutes as well. So only 13% projected ownership for him with forward eligibility, which I think is a little bit more valuable than guard or center eligibility on this slate. I really like getting the Scotty Barnes at that ownership, even though it is a scary matchup. And then OG Anunoby, I think also, we saw some good things there. He is chucking up shots. Going back to the preseason this year, he's got about a 24% usage rate. He's playing at the 4, or he's getting more minutes at the 4 at least than he would if Siakam were playing, 40 minutes a night. So the rebounding opportunities are there. Not a priority for me at 6,200, but I do think he has a higher ceiling than you would typically associate him with. And the final thing to point out from Toronto, another foul trouble situation. Precious Achiuwa played about 18 minutes in that opener. He picked up, I believe it was 3 fouls in the first half, which is part of why he played so few minutes. 1 foul in his first stint, but then he picked up 2 more in the second quarter and missed the final 5 minutes and 46 seconds. I think that the front court rotation is going to be pretty messy. And you're just going to have some games where Birch steals minutes or, eventually Boucher steals minutes. But 3,600 for Precious Achiuwa, someone we know that can produce at a high per minute rate. And there's some chance that if he's not in foul trouble, he plays 24 minutes or something. Kind of in that Nick Claxton category for me, where I'm not playing tons of him, but I do think he has that, 30 fantasy point upside at sub 4K.
I mean, where else are you going to get hard-hitting, comprehensive, yet concise analysis like you just heard right there? It's good stuff, man. On the other side, though,
people in chat keep saying with Beal out, what do we do with the Wizards? We did that game as if Beal was out, so go back and watch that section.
Yes, more hard-hitting analysis that seemingly everybody missed out on. But yeah, we were Beal was already doubtful, so he is out. It's not earth-shattering news. It's important, but we expected Beal to be out. So that is why we've got Tyler operating the sidebar. All of those games, if you want to go back and watch, just rewind it and hit on one of those and then come back to where you're at. It's pretty simple. We do that for your convenience. All right, so Boston, Jaylen Brown last game, Adam, dude, absolutely phenomenal performance. Jason Tatum, on the other hand, not so great, but it wasn't for the lack of volume. Like, he still got up 30 shots, 15 of them threes, half of his field goals were threes, but he shot 7 of 30 and 2 for 15 from long range. So really all it was, and we've seen this, to be fair, with Tatum. Tatum will go out there and have some wildly underwhelming games with insane volume and then come back the next day and shoot like 16 for 24.
Yeah, the real takeaway was just that I guess there really wasn't any actual takeaway from that game. Jaylen Brown's really good at basketball. He can have some monster games. Jason Tatum is really, really involved in the offense. They both had usage rates around 30 to 31%. That's in line with what they've done going back to last season. And I think they're both good tournament options again tonight. Right now, we only have Jaylen Brown projected for about 5% ownership. Kind of surprising to me coming off of that game, but at the same time, there are so many good options on this slate. It does make some sense. But if the ownership projections do stay that low, I do like Jaylen Brown quite a bit. I think that the ceiling is really high. I still think he's a little bit cheaper than he should be. And then the same can be said for Tatum, who right now I'm getting less of than Jaylen Brown because of the difference in ownership. But if those ownership projections were to flip, I would play a lot of Jason Tatum because I think that, he shot 20, he had a 31% true shooting percentage in that game. He's just not going to do that very often. The opportunities were there. He's still going to play a huge role on this team, and he's a better fantasy producer per minute than Jaylen Brown.
Jared, Neil, Westbrook going to go off with Beal out will put up 70.
Someone said Westbrook going off without Durant and Harden tonight.
What's that?
Somebody said Westbrook's going off without Durant and Harden tonight.
There you go. I mean, I don't know. That's why I try to make sure that early in the season, everything is streamlined because, some people slightly behind the 8 ball. That's okay. As long as you're here and you hit that thumbs up, it doesn't matter to me.
I'm actually surprised I haven't done it on a show yet. Just like
we will.
X guy is the 7th man in the rotation. And it's like, oh yeah, he's not on that team anymore.
Yeah, we will. But like Westbrook, that was not something you could miss.
Yeah, that was huge news. And obviously for me, I wasn't going to get it wrong. But
right.
Yeah, I was surprised I made it through because now at least I've talked about every team once. I was surprised I made it through Tuesday and Wednesday without like a massive, oh shit, that guy doesn't play there anymore.
Robert Williams is like the stock master. I mean, this guy can just rack up an insane amount of stock, steals plus blocks. He had 8 last game, 45 minutes, of course, double overtime, but a defensive stud who is going to give you those counting stats that you're looking for. Is his price point reasonable for you tonight across the industry?
As long as the ownership is low, yeah. He's another, and it is, he's projected for 5% ownership. His floor isn't that high because he's not a high usage player and he relies on defensive stats, which are volatile from game to game. But at the same time, that's really, really appealing in tournaments too, because he can just go out there and pile up blocks and steals. He also played 35 minutes in regulation last game, 45 minutes overall. I'm not expecting 35 minutes from him again, but the fact that we saw that happen, and especially in the first game of the season, is just really, really encouraging because he's one of those players where you get a little bit nervous, like projecting him for more than 30 minutes because in the past, he's averaged 25 or 26 minutes per game as a starter. So just seeing that happen was really, really good. He had, I think, 5 blocks and 3 steals. Someone pointed it out in chat today that it was kind of point chasing. And that's the right process, but kind of the wrong guy to apply it to, because that's exactly what Robert Williams does. That's why his ceiling is so high, is he gets defensive stats at a ridiculous rate, in addition to, being able to rebound and then occasionally put the ball in the basket. So still a really high ceiling for him. The way Josh put it this morning, I agree with, Like let's say he ends up just averaging 26 minutes per start, like he has in the past, he's still going to have some games at 6,200 where he does really well. So if you're just totally wrong on the minutes, you still have some outs. If he plays 30 minutes per game as a starter, he's going to be like 7,500 pretty quickly. And if he somehow does actually play mid 30s per game, he's going to be a 9K center by the end of the month, by the end of next month. So it's kind of a situation where, like, even if you do get unlucky on the minutes, you still can get lucky with the result. You're not going to be in that much trouble. But if he does play the minutes it seems like he can play, getting around 30, he's underpriced and has a really high ceiling.
That's a good way to look at it. You're right. Based on just his overall history of per minute production, Robert Williams, if he's out there, he's going to produce. Anything else for Boston before we talk about the Pels and Bulls?
No.
All right, let's go to the Pels and the Bulls then. New Orleans Pelicans, 6-point dogs, 223 total in this one. Josh Hart is out, got injured in that on opening night. The Bulls, well, we'll get there, but let's start with the Pelicans. You have no Zion Williamson. You have no Josh Hart, who was going to be, he was going to get minutes, regardless of whether he's viable for fantasy or not. What are you doing with somebody like Brandon Ingram, who is going to be the clear top dog here? But I do wonder, like, do you factor in that Steven Adams never been a good rebounder and Zion Williamson being out, but because his rebounding prowess is whatever, but like Jovel is going to gobble up rebounds night to night. Do you think that affects Ingram in some of his peripherals, like rebounds?
That and the usage for Valanciunas, but I still think it's a net positive with Zion being out. Looking at Ingram's rates last year with or without Zion, he jumped from like a 25% usage rate to 31%. His point per minute production went from about 1.08 DraftKings points per minute to 1.25. I think replacing Steven Adams with Jonas Valanciunas puts a dent in that, just because Valanciunas is a higher usage guy. He rebounds really well. Adams can rebound too, but it makes it so I think Ingram still produces at a higher rate than he would if Zion were in like last year, but it not quite as well as he did last year without Zion. So ultimately it makes him a good option here. He's projected for about 12% ownership. That's around where I got him. I don't feel really strongly one way or the other. I certainly wouldn't be upset if I get a little bit more, because I think he is really good, but he does get a bump. He is still reasonably priced. The thing that keeps me from getting more of him is just that Tobias Harris is $300 less. When you look at the center position, you have a ton of really high upside guys in this price range as well. You have those pay-up options that we've talked about with Sabonis and Tatum and Randall. There's just a lot of players in this price range to get to.
Anybody else for the Pels stand out to you?
Valanciunas.
Okay.
7,200. I kind of felt bad. I left him out of the deep dive today because when I wrote it, he looked good, but not like great to me. And then I updated some stuff and he started looking even better. He lost a few minutes in that last game due to the blowout. They got, annihilated by Philly. Valanciunas subbed out with 4 minutes and 22 seconds to go in that game. He had already played 29 and a half minutes. I think if this game's competitive, it's reasonable to think you're getting 31, 32 minutes from Jovel. We know he's got a massive ceiling. We've seen it from every team he's been on. And then with Zion being out here, there is, plenty of usage to go around for him. There's obviously a lot of rebounding opportunities, and he's pretty inexpensive. Also not getting a ton of ownership, only 8% projected ownership right now. You compare that to someone like Nikola Vucevic, who I think is a very, very good play. We'll talk about him on the other side, but he's getting 22% ownership. I don't think there's a drastic difference in the range of outcomes between these two. So it makes me really, really like getting to Jovel in those builds where I go to mid-range centers.
All right. Tyler, I'm going to have to skip the Hall of Fame segment today because I want to make sure we get through all of these, but I will let you guys know. We always shout you out. We brag for you. We throw the screenshots up there, and we give you a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. If you use the Awesemo avatar at awesemo.com/avatar, and tweet us your wins. If you finish first through third in a field of 5,000 or more, it doesn't matter if it's a quarter or a nickel or $100, whatever, and tweet it at Awesemo HOF, at Awesemo Hall of Fame. You can put the graphic up there, Tyler. Give you a free month, and we shout you out here, usually with those segments. But Adam and I are getting our footing back underneath of us, and pacing might be an issue for the first couple of days. So bear with us here, but be sure to use that and use the avatar. So when you win, you get more on top of that juicy money that you're going to take down from finishing first through third in a large field tournament. All right. So what are you doing with the Bulls today?
Vucevic looks very good at 7,800. I think he's on the short list of cash options for DraftKings. He's one of the most popular center options on the slate. He's just another one where the approach for me is just very different, between cash games and tournaments. I understand how good Vooch is. I think it's pretty likely that he gets you 45, 50 DraftKings points at 7,800. It's just, you're trying to win top heavy tournaments. So I don't mind being below the field if he's going to come in at 20%, because I do think that there's a lot of alternatives like Valanciunas on the other side of this game that give you a similar range of outcomes. So he's a good play in any format, but definitely want to be aware of what the rest of your lineup looks like if you're playing him in tournaments. Zach LaVine at 8K, I think, is another just high upside option. He is kind of appealing too, because if he goes out and has an absolute monster game, it's likely, or at least possible, that he's taking some production away from Vooch. You only have 11% ownership going to LaVine, 22% to Vooch. I basically flipped that in the crunch that I ran before the show, got around 20 to 24%. LaVine got around 10 to 15% Vooch. If that is how it works out for me, I'd be really happy with that, just because I think that you're getting very, very similar ceilings from both guys. Vooch is just getting more ownership because he projects a little bit better.
OKC and Houston. At this point, is Houston the worst team in the league?
It might still be Orlando.
You think so? It could be. You're right. Right now, Houston's just, they're bad. But amazingly, going up against Oklahoma City, the Rockets are 3-point favorites. This game should stay close. It's one of the few times the Rockets probably won't get blown out this season. And it's certainly going to open things up for us, namely Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The ownership coming in on him is high for a reason, Adam. And at this rate, it seems like the price point is just way too low.
Yeah, agreed completely. Gilgeous-Alexander, I think, he's just one of these guys where I don't really think there's that much around him that is even comparable. He's going to be popular. I expect to just have a lot of him even in tournaments, because this is someone that averages over 1.2 DraftKings points per minute. He's got an excellent matchup against Houston. He's priced like $1,500 to $2,000 less than he should be on DraftKings. He's just going to fit into so many lineups really easily that I'm going to end up just eating chalk there.
Yeah. So one of your favorite plays on the slate, I assume.
Yeah, without a doubt. And if you play cash games against somebody without Gilgeous-Alexander on DraftKings, probably try and play them more.
Yeah. So seek that name out. What about Josh Giddey? He's getting a lot of ownership as well.
Yeah, I like him as a value. He's small forward eligible, which is nice. He didn't do a whole lot in the first game, but this is obviously a better matchup than it was against Utah. The thing I really like about Giddey is the rotation that OKC used last game. They staggered his minutes for the most part with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He is someone that can make plays. And so having him out there with Gilgeous-Alexander, I think, is beneficial. Even looking at preseason numbers, he was much more productive without Gilgeous-Alexander on the floor. So at 4,100 in this matchup, I still like going there. Definitely, pay attention to the ownership, kind of like I was saying with Jalen Suggs. I think he's a good value. I think he's a good play, but I also would be pretty surprised if Giddey actually scores enough raw points that, you're dead if you don't have him. So, I'm not afraid to get away from him in lineups where I am playing a couple of other popular guys, but where I've already made a couple contrarian plays, I do like Giddey as a value.
You got anything else from OKC?
Derek Favors is similar to Claxton and whoever else the other guy I said. There was another $3,800 center that I kind of liked. Giddey's in that boat as well. Favors in that boat as well.
Just a couple notes here. All of the questionable players from the Pacers are starting, Adam, and Al Horford is also starting for Boston. Josh Richardson's available, but yeah, Al Horford's starting. What's that?
Starting in place of Grant Williams, I assume.
I would assume. I don't know who else it would be over.
Yeah, that would make sense.
It's a pretty big lineup.
Yeah, I don't know how many minutes he'll play either. Like on the injury report, his status was trying to regain conditioning. I'm thinking probably like 18, 20 minutes. That's my guess, is like
5-minute spurts.
Yeah, like open the first half, close the first half, open the second half, probably don't come back in the game.
With Houston tonight, they're not going to be a good team, but there are going to be opportunities. Do you remember last year how many times, and of course there were injuries, right? There were times where they had like the bare minimum available to play. And we were having like 4 or 5 Houston Rockets players in our lineups for a week straight. It didn't feel good, but it worked. Christian Wood going to be popular today. Jalen Green at a sub 5K price point going to be popular today. That's pretty much anyone that's getting any ownership for Houston. But both of these guys projected for 20+%.
And I think they should. They are both just mispriced and very very high ceiling guys. There again, there's a lot of alternatives on this slate, but they do have ceilings that are pretty appealing in tournaments. They're mispriced. I think both guys are in play in cash. I think they're both strong tournament plays as well. One slight negative for Christian Wood, he has only averaged 1.07 DraftKings points per minute with Kevin Porter on the floor going back to last year. So that is something to keep in mind. But a positive for these guys, Houston's rotation last game was absolutely insane. It doesn't really show up because when you look, a lot of these guys only played about 32 minutes. Most of them played 20 minutes in the first half. Jalen Green played about 20 first half minutes. Wood played about 20 first half minutes. Porter, I think, was in some foul trouble, but other than that, played huge minutes. Not saying that they play 40 tonight if this game is close, but the rotation that they ran last game was putting them in line to play 38, 40 minutes in a competitive game.
So of this game, who are your top options outside of SGA?
Christian Wood, Jalen Green. Yeah.
Okay.
Like Kevin Porter in tournaments, I like just because he's got a really high ceiling, but I think Wood and Green are the ones that really stand out.
San Antonio and Denver. Let's get to this one. We've got 3 to go here. We'll make it. No problem. We'll hit on, of course, all of the important stuff, make your guys' life a little bit easier, and then turn this one over to Greg Ehrenberg and Terry McBride, taking you all the way up till 7 o'clock lock here. Spurs 7.5 point dogs, 221 total in Denver. Adam, no real injuries to speak of here outside of guys that were already going to be ruled out for a significant period of time. Do the Spurs stand out as a team to you that have, any real big time value? Because I know DeJounte Murray, like that's a good price point on him. He's a stat sheet stuffer, and I love playing those type of guys. And I suppose maybe some Derek White. But DeJounte Murray for me is just someone that anytime I can get him at a mid-range price point, I'm willing to take some shots there.
Yeah, I agree. High upside for him. It's a pretty tough spot. I mean, you're going into Denver. You're clearly the inferior team. There is some risk here, but if the Spurs are able to hang in this game and play well, there's a good chance Murray's producing at a high rate. He is getting ownership too, though, so it's just not a spot where I intend to take a really strong stand one way or the other. Derek White, I think, going a little bit over-owned. He only has averaged 0.9 DraftKings points per minute with Murray on and DeRozan off the floor going back to last year. So he's still someone that has a decent ceiling, but I think getting a little bit more ownership than he should. Conversely, Keldon Johnson, we have seen the usage come up for him going back to the preseason and including last game, around 24% usage for Keldon Johnson. Could play 30 to 32 minutes if this game's competitive. Not someone that I think is safe or that I'm super confident in, but at only 6% ownership at 5K, I do think being over the field on Keldon Johnson in tournaments makes sense.
But overall, San Antonio, a team to you that you'll have a little bit, right? 150 maxing, or even if you were playing like 30, 20 lineups, you might have a little bit sprinkled in there, but not a team to prioritize is what you're saying.
Yeah, they're just, I think the field pretty much has it right. DeJounte Murray is fine. White is okay. Johnson's fine. But nothing to go crazy about.
What about Nikola Jokic? Today, I'm looking at our projections. No surprise, he's going to get ownership, even at an expensive price point. He's just, of course, one of the best players out there. In our boom bust tool, he's tied for 4th highest boom percentage on the slate, a pretty low bust percentage because it's Nikola Jokic. Jamal Murray won't be on the floor. Ultimately, this is just one of those spots where night in and night out, Jokic, whether he produces or not, is absolutely going to have the volume to produce.
Yeah, and he'll probably score 70 tonight because all I needed last time to win a tournament was 58, and he can only get 50. So probably a huge game coming. But I think that I probably end up around the field on him. I like Jokic a lot. The reason that I say I probably only end up around the field is that at least right now we're projecting him to be a lot more popular than Embiid. And I think that they're very, very comparable in terms of projection and range of outcomes. So where I'm paying up, I'm going to be preferring Embiid. And then also there's just so many good centers that I'm going to end up getting exposure to. So I love Jokic. I'll be happy with whatever amount I get. I think the ownership right now is about where it should be on him.
Are you getting to anybody else for Denver though?
Michael Porter Jr., I think at 6,300 stands out as a good value. You kind of run into the issue again. He's projected for 22% ownership. There's so many good plays on this slate that there's not many that I'm like going over the field on at that sort of ownership. But I do think he's one of the better, point per dollar forward options. And then Will Barton, I'm kind of interested in just because he got the backup minutes in the second half last game. If that's something that they continue going forward and he runs the second unit with a bunch of low usage guys, he's going to have a lot of big games.
All right. Now, Phoenix and the Lakers. When we get to OddsShopper, I have a spot here that I'm hitting hard today, and hopefully it pays off. That's from a betting standpoint, though. From an overall DFS standpoint, Lakers games tend to be underwhelming. 221.5 total. Lakers only favored by 1 at home. cover this game just from front to back, Adam, both Lakers and Phoenix. I don't think you're going to need a ton of time on it for a 10-game slate.
No, I don't think you do either. It's just one of these games where it's very obvious, I think, what the good plays are. If you're playing some Chris Paul, some Devin Booker, some DeAndre Ayton from the Phoenix side, they're all fine. The issue is just that there are going to be guys that are more mispriced than them. So the way I plan to use them is just, mixing them into lineups that are otherwise chalky, mix in some Chris Paul, mix in some Devin Booker. Same thing on the other side with the Lakers. From a median projection standpoint, they don't look great because you have to account for the fact that James, Davis, and Westbrook are all sharing the ball. But from an upside standpoint, there's still really high ceilings on these guys, and they're not getting quite as much ownership as alternatives in their price range. LeBron James, 5% ownership, Anthony Davis, 2%, Westbrook, 1%. In particular, I like James. Had the ball in his hands a lot last game. He kind of just looked like he's still going to run the offense. Davis is going to be the 2. And then Westbrook took a huge backseat last game. I don't know I don't think that happens every single night going forward, but the fact that it happened in game 1 and it lines up with what you'd sort of expect to happen, it makes me drop Westbrook quite a bit behind these guys. He wasn't getting a lot of, he had like a 19% usage rate in the game. He just wasn't doing a whole lot on the floor, didn't get a lot of rebound chances. So I do like using LeBron in tournaments quite a bit. Anthony Davis would be next. And then, Westbrook, it's still fine at 1%, but I would put him behind Davis and LeBron.
Any priority plays from either side, or mostly just tournament plays, large field tournament plays?
Yeah, just large field tournament plays.
Okay. All right, Adam, let me tell you this much, though. And we got one game to go after this. We're doing good. We're going to make it. And we've hit on most of the important stuff. Over at oddshopper.com, everything's free, first of all. But I've been using it a ton lately because it's super easy to find the easiest bet. And my favorite thing to do is just sort by expected win rate. Like if you go to oddshopper.com and click shop NBA or shop NFL, and then sort by expected win rate, you get our projections giving you the highest expected win rate, highest expected ROI on all of these players. It's great. And they'll give you the best place to bet them, where the best bet is, aggregated from all of the books that are available in your state. Make sure to sort by your state as well, if it's legal there. Sort by props. You can check off each individual team, a million different ways to do it. We just talked about Russell Westbrook, and I agree with you from a DFS standpoint. I'm not really there tonight, but I'm looking at this 71% win rate, and I like this one anyway. Russell Westbrook over 6.5 assists, despite everything we saw last game. And did you know that his DraftKings points per minute in that game, Adam, was the worst since 2011? He hasn't had that DraftKings point per minute production since a game in 2011. So not good, but he had 16 potential assists. The assist opportunities will still be there for Russell Westbrook. Him getting 7 assists in what should be a highly efficient offense, I think he crushes that total tonight and bounces back after a weak showing in his Lakers debut. What do you have?
Yeah, I like the Scotty Barnes over 2.5 assists. I mentioned, from a DFS standpoint, I like him, but including the preseason, he's played 164 minutes. He has a 25.9% assist percentage. Even if you drop that down some for, playing more minutes with the starters, I'm expecting him to play 32 plus minutes tonight. He's going to get enough opportunities. He had 5 potential assists last game. I like the, over 2.5 assists for Scotty Barnes.
Check this tool out, guys. I truly think you'll like it. Even if you're just a casual bettor and you don't have time to look through everything, this will give you the best bets, and it's free. And use the links in there if you're looking to sign up for other sites, because the promotional stuff they're doing with everyone just trying to get over each other and in this competition for new users as sports betting opens up, you're going to get like $1,000 risk-free bets and $100 bet, just ridiculous stuff. Take advantage of that. Oddshopper.com and use the shop NBA and shop NFL. All right, Adam, we're up against it, but you've got Utah and Sacramento. Close us out for tonight. Final game of the show.
So this is another one where I don't think there's a ton that stands out as priorities. There are certainly spots you can get to in tournaments, primarily from the Utah side. Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, both high upside guys that have better alternatives around them in terms of projection. One spot that I am really interested in that I don't think is going to get much ownership is Mike Conley at 5,700 on DraftKings. Currently projected for 8% ownership. He played about 25 minutes last game, didn't get his final rotation. If he had, he probably would have come in around 29 to 30 minutes. He's averaged 1.1 DraftKings points per minute since the start of last season. He's pretty cheap. It's not a bad matchup here. I like him at relatively low ownership. On the Sacramento side, I'm not chasing Harrison Barnes' unbelievable three-point shooting from last game. De'Aaron Fox at 8,400, I think, is the guy that looks the best, just because his salary did drop. He does have a massive ceiling, but it's a really, really tough matchup for Sacramento. There's just not a whole lot that I see here.
Favorite top tier option, favorite mid-range option, and favorite value option to take us out of here.
In tournaments, Joel Embiid at the top. Mid-range, I really like Vooch, but in tournaments, I like pivoting that to Valanciunas or Zach LaVine. And from a value standpoint, absolutely love Scotty Barnes in tournaments.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us. Greg and Terry coming up next. We made it, right? We're a minute or so late, but we made it for a 10-game slate, our second together of the year. I'm surprised we didn't go till 7:30. So, hey, you guys are the greatest. Got us over 500 likes. No problem. Appreciate you. Hit that subscribe as well. And join if you'd like to get all that cool stuff along the way. By the way, someone asked in chat, oddshopper.com, if that's what we were using. Anyway, stick around. Live Before Lock coming in next. Good luck tonight, guys. Have a good weekend as well. Peace.
It is the Awesemo NBA Live Before Lock show. And oh, is this an exciting one? Because just when you think that, when is basketball really going to get into the swing of being what it truly is, 30 seconds before we're about to start the show, I've got my lineups all uploaded. I'm ready to go. And then Darius Garland ruled out. Ricky Rubio is starting in his place. That is news that broke right in between these shows flipping over. So Terry and I are going to be breaking down this slate. And, in true NBA fashion, everything kind of gets turned on its head right before we start. So Terry, how are you doing? And then we could start breaking news, which I expect is just going to be a steady run for the next 6 months starting right now.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And early season, my first show of the year. I don't know. I think you've been on a couple and maybe did some preseason stuff. I wasn't playing in the preseason, but I had a little bit of an eye on it. But yeah, I just feel like I just got up to speed again with the NFL, and all of a sudden we're switching over to NBA. So yeah, excited to dive into it. Should be fun wrestling with all the news that comes out and remembering who's on what team and all. But I'm here for it. Should be a good one.
So let's start right off the bat here because we've got breaking news, and that often ends up being the way this show goes. As much as we try to come up with some sort of plan in advance of how we're going to attack this slate, say here's who we're going to get exposure to, we're going to go talk position by position. More often than not, this show just ends up being a player gets ruled out. We break down how it changed our lineups. We update our lineups. Player gets ruled out, and then we rinse and repeat and do it all over again. And I also want to iterate that here are some of the players that we're still waiting on news for. Well, actually, of importance, it's really just Joel Embiid. However, Doc Rivers did say Joel Embiid, a true game time decision and absolutely 50-50 to play. That is at least what Doc Rivers had to say about the situation with Joel Embiid. So that game starts at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Hopefully we get that news up somewhere in the near future. But let's talk about Darius Garland being ruled out, Ricky Rubio starting in his place. Terry, how do you think this impacts the Cleveland Cavaliers? And do you like Ricky Rubio as a value play here now?
5,300, 5,600 across the two sites. It'll give him a little bit of a bump, but I don't know that it's enough that it's going to get him into my lineups very much. We saw him 25 minutes in the opening game as a backup. He'll get probably up into the 30 range, 0.96 fantasy points per minute last season. So I expect we'll see him a little bit more optimal than the sub 2% mark that we had him at. We'll have him at a little bit higher of a boom percentage than the 3% we had him at. I just don't think, even with multi-position eligibility on the FanDuel slate, point guard, shooting guard, I don't see him really having an effect. Maybe I get to a little bit more Sexton. I expect he'll get a little bit of a nudge in terms of usage, in terms of what I expect his points will look like, and probably not much on any of these other guys in terms of the impact there. Like, I don't expect it's going to have a dramatic impact on Mobley, who is getting to a decent amount already anyway, despite the chalk on him. So I really think it's probably just about getting Rubio in there, and then maybe a little bit of a nudge to the Colin Sexton side. Is Rubio somebody that would interest you, like on the DK side for 5,300?
Yes, I'm already trying to update kind of some of my expectations for the minutes here, and I have Ricky Rubio playing 32 minutes right now, and like you said, as a guy who scores right around a fantasy point per minute, that has him right around 32 fantasy points for me. I imagine that when I re-upload my lineups and run them again, he's going to pop up in, not a crazy amount of lineups, because we still have other guys, like Spencer Dinwiddie's priced right around him, and Dinwiddie, I think, by default is just going to become a core play for me on the slate without Bradley Beal out there for the Wizards. So to me, Ricky Rubio, he's going to be in my lineups for sure, but I'm going to guess probably from the neighborhood of like 20-25%, which is certainly a healthy amount. A little bit different, like you said, pricing on FanDuel versus DraftKings. And DraftKings, even though FanDuel's introduced the multi-position eligibility, there's still a factor to consider, which is that he's cheaper on DraftKings, and DraftKings still has the ability also play players in the guard spot and the utility spot. So there's still a little more flexibility on DK. So the cheaper price point, I think Rubio does become a better play on DK. Now, I also pulled up the numbers last year for the Cavaliers with Darius Garland off the court. Now, keep in mind, it's going to be a little bit different. The team makeup's different. Obviously, they have Ricky Rubio in there. He was not on the team last year. But this is the data we have to go off of, and I think it's a pretty good, at least, starting point. And when Darius Garland was off the court last year, Colin Sexton had a 31.4% usage rate. He scored 39.24 DraftKings points per 36 minutes. If we look at his price point on FanDuel, he's priced at 7,300. On DraftKings, Colin Sexton is priced at 7,500. So the FanDuel price point is certainly a little bit more appealing. I'm going to assume that once I update, he's going to be somebody who I project for right around that 40 fantasy point mark. So the guys that are definitely going to be the core plays for me, or the key plays for me out of this, are going to be Ricky Rubio and Colin Sexton. But are there any other ancillary pieces of the Cavaliers, maybe like Lauri Markkanen with the usage bump, do you think could end up in your lineups more?
I don't know that it's going to have that effect to bump them that much more into my lineups. I mean, we might see him land in, one extra lineup, two extra lineups down toward the bottom when I'm going through the sorting process, just on a little bit of a boost to the projection, a little bit of a boost to the optimal lineup rate, to my on target rates that I have when I do the update here. So it might have that trickle down effect, but not anything dramatic. I think the dramatic impact is going to be on getting to more Sexton shares. I just updated. It looks like he had a little bit of a bump in Alex's numbers. around a 35-point projection, around 8% optimal. He had been around like 3% optimal. Still not getting much public ownership, though, so you get a nice little leverage mark on him. And he's a guy that we've seen rocket through ceiling scores in the past. You mentioned what he does without Garland on the floor. Also, just in general, across all situations, a 1.01 fantasy point per minute producer last season. So we can expect a bump from that and a bump in the usage. In game one, he only saw 21.7% usage, but across all situations last year, 28.6. You mentioned something more like 31 without Garland out there. I think we can reasonably expect something between 28 and 31% usage for Sexton here. So it's a nice little bump for him, and I expect that'll get him into some more of my lineups than he was.
All right, so I am uploading all this and rerunning lineups. I also want to see, when was the last ownership update? Did you say that it came after the Garland news, or not yet? I'm refreshing the page.
Boom bust update came that has ownership on it, but it looks like that the ownership itself is not updated yet. So I think they're working their way through.
Okay, so it doesn't have the ownership there, but I still think it's telling that we could look at what is the optimal lineup odds we currently have projected for these guys. And Colin Sexton, we're landing in the optimal lineup 3.6% of the time. That is, still fairly low. Ricky Rubio. Oh, this isn't going to be updated yet in terms of optimal lineup odds, because at least for me, it would certainly be higher than 2% on Sexton, 1% for Rubio, but.
On the FanDuel side, Sexton jumped up into the 8% range, which is a little bit more playable, particularly if we get him with some leverage.
Yeah, so we'll see where that ownership goes when we get an update. We'll definitely be shouting that out. And now the other key piece of injury news right now, like we said before, Joel Embiid questionable to play, totally up in the air his status, whether he's going to go or not. He's dealing with knee soreness. I really don't know what to make here. And I take Doc at his word that Joel Embiid's a true 50-50 decision, but how is this impacting your lineups heading into lock with us really not knowing whether Embiid is in or out?
I don't know if I take Doc at his word on this one. I think it's one of those management situations that we'll see a lot through the year where he's just going to be, coming up to lock. He'll be quote unquote questionable, not actually dealing with an injury or anything, severe. So I assume that we're going to see him. If we see him, I assume he's full go. I'm not really sweating that one unless we, obviously if we see something, it's going to be a major piece of news. If he sits out, it's major adjustments. He's a guy that I was actually having to force into a little bit, just given some of the ridiculously optimal, ridiculously cheap value plays at center that we've got on the FanDuel slate. So I liked him where we could get him in, multi-position roster, multiple centers on the DK slate. But on FanDuel, even with the multi-position now, we're stuck on a few guys where we only have center eligibility still. And Embiid's one of those guys. Jokic is one of those guys. Valanciunas is one of those guys. And all three of those guys were firmly in the mix for me. But it was a matter of where I was having to force in a little bit of Embiid, a little bit of Jokic, just because Valanciunas was so cheap and coming up so frequently optimal. So it'll be a matter of unwinding that for me. But it's not going to be a major amount of shares. Like, it's just a cross section of shares that I kind of forced in here. So hopefully it won't be a big impact. If we get the starting news, I'm going to try and force more of them because I really like Embiid here.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense, especially the later the news comes out. It's always hard to project for in terms of ownership in NBA because, who knows how much time people are going to be able or even be able to react in that kind of situation. We found that Joel Embiid is in at 6:55 Eastern time, like 5 minutes before the slate locks. People probably aren't going to be going out of their way to say, hey, I want to roster Joel Embiid there. People are probably setting their lineups at that point in time. So I think the later that we find out that Joel Embiid's in, if he ends up being in, that makes him a more appealing play. However, on the other side, if he's out, Andre Drummond just becomes a lock and load play to me. Andre Drummond, as much as I dislike him as a real life player and don't think he really brings much to the table, from a fantasy perspective, he's still one of the better points per minute fantasy producers that we have for DFS purposes. So Andre Drummond to me would become a very pivotal play if there's no Joel Embiid. Tobias Harris, he would see a massive usage bump with no Joel Embiid and, of course, no Ben Simmons there for them right now. But is there anything else that you see from the Sixers that you would want to get to if Joel Embiid doesn't play?
Yeah, I mean, Drummond becomes the absolute smash spot at that 5,300, 5,500 price tag across the industry, a 1.37 fantasy point per minute player last year. You mentioned it. He's in ideal for the modern game kind of a center, but when he's out there, he can absolutely rack up rebounds in a hurry. He can rack up a few points, and he does a lot of damage on the floor in the limited minutes that he plays. So if we see him out there for a decent amount of run, yeah, sign me up for that. I'll get over the field on the shares of him. Tobias Harris, I'm getting to a decent amount of anyway. I think he's underpriced at 7,200 on DK, 7,600 on FanDuel, especially with Ben Simmons, Bill Simmons, yeah. especially with Ben Simmons not on the floor. We see a decent usage spike in it for Tobias Harris anyway. 30.5% usage in game one. He was at 23.7 across all situations last season. 1.12 fantasy points per minute with the 23%. So I expect just a general bump, at least until we see Simmons come back. And if the price stays down, I'll be getting to him pretty frequently. He's negatively leveraged, Tobias, on the FanDuel slate, and I expect that would become an even more negatively leveraged situation if we do see Embiid sit. So that's something to consider, but he is one of the more frequently optimal plays. You get him at both forward spots on FanDuel. You only get him as a power forward on DK, negatively leveraged across both sites, but it's one of those situations where I think I might not care that much, and I might just roster him as good chalk in that situation if Embiid's out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then once again, another situation is Andre Drummond would be an obvious value play if Joel Embiid was ruled out at 1 o'clock Eastern time or 5:30 on the injury report. If this is something that doesn't break until after the slate locks, which is possible because Joel Embiid's a game time decision, or it doesn't break until right before the slate starts, that would reduce the ownership share on a guy who might have been 40, 50% owned, and maybe you get half of that because if the news breaks really late. Also, a good time to bring up that since this show is sponsored by Yahoo, Terry and I, we are going to be sticking around for another 30 minutes after the slate locks. We're going to be talking about a little bit of Yahoo DFS. We're also going to be talking about the single game showdown slates later in the day. We're also going to be doing some player props, going over some of the best projections, best bets we have on the site. So guys, stick around after the show's over because we'll be covering that. Another thing also is we're going to be covering any injury news that happens. If somebody unexpectedly gets ruled out, Terry and I are going to be breaking that down and see how that is going to impact the slate. So whether you're playing on Yahoo, maybe you're unsure if you want to play on Yahoo, there's going to be some information for everybody in that final 30-minute section of the show that Terry and I are going to be doing. But let's jump over to the position by position now, because we've gotten the injury news for now. There's probably going to be something else that comes out 5 minutes from now, but everything that's on the table we've talked about to this point. But let's talk about now the chalk of the slate as of now at the guard position. That's Spencer Dinwiddie, who is seeing what we expect is going to be a massive usage bump with Bradley Beal off the court. We don't have that much data to rely on with Spencer Dinwiddie. So I'm kind of taking a leap of faith here and just assuming that he's going to see a massive uptick in usage and do kind of everything for Washington today. But he's only played in one game so far this year with the Wizards. He wasn't on the team last year. He missed all of last season, or almost all last season, with an ACL injury. He's going to be a popular play. I'm riding with the chalk today, Terry, but what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm riding with the chalk today too, and it's going with kind of a lot of the Wizards, which is a little concerning to me. I don't love getting to one of the worst basketball teams in the league all that frequently, especially when their best player's out. But we've got justifiable reasons to get to a lot of these guys. They're priced down. There should be a good amount of pace going in this game. Dinwiddie, I agree with you. I think there's plenty of reason to believe in the talent. Of course, we've seen it in the past. But I'm a little concerned about the idea of him getting to, a full complement of minutes. If they capped it at like 28 to 30 minutes, I wouldn't be totally shocked. Just kind of easing him along, even shorthanded. I think they've just got enough guys. They're just going to be gunning a lot of threes in this game. So I think they've got enough gunners that they're not going to really sweat pushing Dinwiddie that much. I agree that it's good chalk. I agree that the numbers say to play it, and I'm riding with it as well. I'm just kind of crossing my fingers about the minutes. That's my main point of concern. If I had absolute lock and load news that it was going to be 34, 35 minutes for Dinwiddie, even 32 minutes, I'd be much, much more confident in the play, but I'm rostering it anyway. So it's a little bit of a dice roll to me. There are other guys I like at both guard positions a lot of the top of the board when we sort by optimal lineup right on both sites. Or guards and shooting guards and point guards. So there are plenty of different directions to go, and you'd be getting away from the field. But I think it's just one of those ones where I'm going to be riding along with a lot of the field on this one as well.
Yeah, he's my most rostered player, which is going to be the case for a lot of the field. But like you said, there are a lot of cheap guys to get to, particularly the rookies. There are a whole bunch of rookies that I like from a fantasy perspective in this draft class. Jalen Suggs being one of them. Josh Giddey is somebody who I'm really high on, not just for this season, but also going forward. So Jalen Green, so both the Jalen Suggs, Jalen Green. But who are you really looking at to pivot off of Dinwiddie with in lineups where you aren't looking to play Dinwiddie?
So just looking around the board, I'm trying to parse the multi-position and the different pricing from site to site as I say this. So we've got Dinwiddie, looking at DraftKings, Dinwiddie at 56. I think I really like Dejounte Murray on this one, but he's up at 7,000. So it's not a direct comparison on FanDuel either, but you get Derek White in a roughly similar price range. I think he's somewhat interesting, similar kind of production, similar kind of expectation in the minutes if Dinwiddie is getting a full complement of minutes, getting a little bit of ownership, but a chunk less than Dinwiddie in terms of the raw ownership. And some of his indicators in terms of the optimal lineup rate, not that far off of the mark that we've got Dinwiddie from. He's significantly less owned. He's still in negative leverage, but not to an extreme degree. So it's a little bit more comfortable in that area. Looking around at some of the other guys on the board who are coming up by optimal lineup rate, let me resort for the DraftKings side of things here, and we can talk that through. So looking at, you've got some value guys in on the same team. You could go to KCP for 3,500. He's coming up a significant optimal rate. Now you're not talking about a tremendous amount of raw points. You're not talking about a giant potential to do a lot of damage in terms of a ceiling score. He's got a 25% boom score probability, but it's for a low score because it's related to his salary there. So I'm not wild about that one, but I think he works if you want to drop it down to an extreme value spot at that position. There are other guys like Jalen Green, Jalen Suggs that you mentioned, both the rookies. They're totally fine. Going by some of these salaries, Will Barton would probably be like the bottom of the list if I'm just looking by optimal lineup rate. He drops below the 10% optimal rate. I like to try and keep some of those when I'm looking for pivots in a reasonable range, particularly when we've got Dinwiddie approaching 30% optimal. I don't love cutting 20% of the optimal lineup rate out of a pivot, but Will Barton, similar price to Dinwiddie, and another guy, somewhat similar expectation for production in that role. So that would be around where I would cut it if we're just talking about similarly priced guys. There are other guys in different price tiers that I like getting to in it positionally.
Yeah, and one of those guys, for me at least, and I'm curious to see if you feel the same way, I think that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is crazy underpriced today, particularly on DraftKings at just $6,700. SGA, I think, is somebody who ultimately at the end of the year probably ends up priced somewhere around the 9,000 range. If you just look at where his draft position was in best ball leagues, for example, he was a second to third round pick in most leagues. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense where he is priced to me on this slate. He's somebody who we have projected for over 40 fantasy points. And maybe some people look at opening day and be like, hey, look, he struggled. I would say, well, it was opening day and he played against the Utah Jazz, one of the best defenses in the league. And if you just go back to last year and see what his pricing was for a lot of the year, he was priced in that 8K range as high as 9,000 in the last month of the season. So somebody who's just woefully underpriced as SGA is on DraftKings. Core play, even on FanDuel, where he's a little more expensive at $7,500, that price isn't nearly high enough either. So if you look at his FanDuel salaries towards the end of last year, also, he was somebody who spent a lot of the year in that 8K range. So SGA to me, also a favorable matchup for him against the Houston Rockets, who Houston really struggled in their first game of the season. They got their asses kicked by the Minnesota Timberwolves. SGA, core play for me. Could you talk me off him at all?
No, not at all. He's my second highest owned play on the FanDuel slate where he's more expensive. So yeah, on DK, absolutely love him. I wrote him up in my optimal lineups article today. I think he's a smash spot for me. He trickled into negative leverage on both sites. He was at like 1 point something positive leverage. I assumed that it would get negative. I do not care. I'm going to be rostering the hell out of SGA in this spot. I agree. He's underpriced by 1,500, somewhere around there probably for his production, a 1.17 fantasy point per minute producer last year on 28.3% usage. In the opening game that you mentioned, it was against a very tough defense. He also only saw 23.8% usage in that game, but I expect that that's going to trend back up toward his 28% range. So I'm really not worried about it at all. Played 32 minutes in the opener. And if we're making it a question of, all right, do I want to pay a little bit more and to an underpriced little bit more for SGA and then pair him with maybe a Dejounte Murray who's significantly positively leveraged on the DK slate for 7,000 at my guard spots and maybe just cut Dinwiddie out of that conversation or undercut the field to Dinwiddie just based on the fear of maybe he's only playing 28 minutes when we know that set in stone, I think SGA and Dejounte Murray are both getting 34, 35 minutes somewhere in that territory today. So to me, that's a consideration at the point guard spot. I also think that Fred VanVleet is interesting with the just amount of volume that he's going to shoot and a little bit of positive leverage on both sites. He's coming up a lot more optimal on the DK slate, but he's coming up with a little bit more leverage on the FanDuel slate. Significant price difference site to site. 8,300 on FanDuel, 6,900 on DK. So like him, 6,900 on DK. So like him a lot better on the DK slate. He's efficiently owned, but that's another one where I think he's coming up optimal enough and you've got enough ceiling there that I'm willing to blow through that efficient ownership.
And then we have a guy I want to talk about next at the guard position. This is also going to correlate with a question we have in our premium Discord channel. Jets World is asking us, pick 2 out of the 3 between Sabonis, Durant, and Harden on DraftKings. Which of 2 of the 3 do we like the most? Those names, Terry, were Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Domantas Sabonis. James Harden is one for me. He's my favorite pay-up option on the slate. So I'm going to start with that as one. And then in between Sabonis and Durant, basically the same ownership between the two of them, a little bit of a higher projection for me with Sabonis. So I'm going to lean towards Sabonis there, but they're really close. But to me, I like Harden a whole bunch on this play. I certainly prefer him to Durant and Sabonis, but pick 2 of the 3, those names again, Harden, Durant, Sabonis. Which one gets left out for you?
Man, I hate to just keep on agreeing with you on stuff, but I'm with you on that. I think it's Sabonis and Harden up top. I agree that Harden is one of my more favorite pay-up options. We see the ridiculous amount of usage that he gets when Kyrie's on the floor. We see the assist rate trickle up. We saw the amount Adam was talking about it on the previous show and this morning, just about the amount that he and Claxton are trying to work together. So if you see Claxton in there, I think there's a little bit of a pairing there. I just think that Harden is a much more dynamic play than Durant is on this slate. So I'm going to be getting to more Harden and Sabonis. Just going by Alex's numbers on this one, we've got Sabonis ranked significantly higher than Durant by about 10, 12 places in terms of ranking and about 7 or so percentage points in the optimal lineup appearance rate. So I'm willing to ride that and a significantly higher boom score probability on him than on Durant. So that's one I'm willing to take on as well. And I was getting to a decent amount of Sabonis on both sites and crunches. So I really like that one too. The ability to move him between power forward and center on FanDuel now is nice. So yeah, I'm into the Sabonis and the Harden side of that one as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about Harden a little bit because he is my favorite option to pay up for on the slate, not just amongst guards, but amongst all positions. And I just think it's being underrated how much the absence of Kyrie Irving benefits James Harden, because I think a lot of people look at the Kyrie Irving situation and just think that like, oh, okay, we've known for so long now that Kyrie Irving wasn't going to be playing to open the season, that maybe people just don't think of this as kind of breaking type news because it isn't, but the price tag still isn't correct. And if you look at the numbers last year for James Harden when Kyrie Irving was off the court, the best fantasy producer on the Nets without Kyrie Irving was not Kevin Durant. It was James Harden by a pretty decent margin. Kevin Durant scored 58 DraftKings points per 36 minutes with Durant, with Kyrie off the court, whereas James Harden scored 61. And then even over on FanDuel scoring, James Harden 58.5 FanDuel points per 36 minutes compared to 56 for Kevin Durant. And James Harden, 10,300 on FanDuel, priced well below 10K on FanDuel on DK. That's just an incorrect salary to me. And I think until we see James Harden priced correctly for the absence of Kyrie Irving, which to me is a little over the 11K mark, he's somebody I'm going to want to get a lot of exposure to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about just purely, if you ask anyone, one of the best players in basketball, at least on the offensive side of the court. I think maybe there's a little bit of residual effect from everybody remembering when he was a little bit hobbled in the playoffs and not really doing much other than standing there and, kind of moving the ball around. So if people are willing to remember that James Harden and forget who this guy really is, I am happy to take it. Had in the first game over a 30% usage rate and over a 52% assist share in that first game. And I think that's reasonable to expect, at least until Kyrie comes back, if Kyrie ever decides to get his shot. If I'm James Harden and Kevin Durant, I'm also just holding down Kyrie in the locker room and jabbing him with a needle, but that's another story. I love the Harden play here. I don't think there's any reason to go away from it. Kevin Durant, are you getting too much Durant here, though? Is he working his way into any of your lineups? Because he's a kind of a force play for me here, and I'm not sure how much I want to do it, but I hate leaving a guy like that out where he's got 60-point potential on any given night.
Not for me. And the reason being is because I like Harden so much. And I set a rule in Fantasy Cruncher to not include James Harden and Kevin Durant in the same lineup today, which when we saw them play the other day, it was a 2-game slate, right? So it was unavoidable to have lineups that had both of them. But for a slate of this size, I prefer not to have them in the same lineup where there's a little bit of negative correlation. I just think Harden is the better play of the two. And to address some people in the YouTube chat who are saying the reason that James Harden had better fantasy numbers for the year is because Kevin Durant missed a lot of the games that Kyrie Irving was out. Well, here are the numbers when Kyrie Irving was off the court and James Harden and Kevin Durant were both on the court last year. James Harden scored 56 DraftKings points per 36 minutes. Kevin Durant scored 52.86. On FanDuel, that equates to 53.55 FanDuel points per 36 minutes for Harden, 49.91 for Kevin Durant. Any way I slice this, James Harden just a better play than Kevin Durant for tonight. I have him projected quite a bit higher, and the numbers back that up. And I mean, it makes sense because these are the numbers I'm using to kind of make my decisions based on. But yeah, I do think that James Harden benefits more from the absence of Kyrie Irving than Kevin Durant does.
Yeah, and I'm just, like I said, I'm kind of at the point I'm looking for him right now as you're going through that answer, and I'm not sure even how much I'm getting to him at all in this most recent crunch and sort here. Yeah, he's only in a couple of these lineups, Durant, and I've got to work on my Embiid share still a little bit here too as we're talking, but I'll force in a couple of them just because, like I said, I do believe in getting to some stars when they're not going, ridiculously owned. But it's not a big play for me. He's only getting 9% ownership on the FanDuel slate, but that's got him still negatively leveraged. We've got him appearing in the optimal lineup 6% of the time. So if I'm around 4, 5, 6% exposure to Kevin Durant, that's probably correct.
Yeah, and once again, I'm just finding him hard to get to, especially under the consideration. I don't want to play Harden and Durant together, but are you doing something similar, not playing Durant and Harden at all in the same lineups?
I didn't have a rule for it, but I'd be surprised if I had it. Let's put it that way, just based on like where my shares were being allocated. I don't know that I have an easy way to look if I think I took that crunch out of Fantasy Cruncher. Yeah, I don't have an easy way to check that. I'd be surprised if it was in that many though.
All right. We did get a question. I'm trying to find it again in our Discord chat. Oh, here it is from Cream. He's asking, how much LaMelo Ball are you getting to? I loved LaMelo the other night. I thought that he was an absolute smash play. I thought that he wasn't owned enough by the field for that slate. This is why it's a little bit different for me with LaMelo today. And he's in my player pool, but not at a significant portion. Terry Rozier is expected to play today. And one of the main reasons that I thought LaMelo looked so good the other day was because there was no Rozier in the backcourt. So it was going to be LaMelo Ball basically taking all of the shots and all the playmaking duties to himself. Now you've got Rozier in the mix. It doesn't take LaMelo out of play, but it doesn't make him nearly the same strong option he was the other day. So I have less than 10% of LaMelo Ball in my lineups to answer Cream's question. But how about for you? How do you feel about LaMelo Ball?
Yeah, right now I am under the field. The field on FanDuel is floating a little bit less than 10%, and I'm below that. I'd actually like to be able to squeeze that above. I just don't know that I have the lineups crunched in what I'm trying to sort here that even include him enough to get there, particularly since it's moving probably shares of Dinwiddie. It's probably moving some shares of Harden. So I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to force. I'd like to squeeze a little bit more in there though, because we do have them coming up optimal 12% of the time. We do have them as a positive leverage mark, at least as of my last update. I give him a little bit of a ding with Rozier coming back, but I think he's just good enough and he does so much on the court that I don't take that much away from him. I like the price at 8,200. I love the price at 7,700 on the DK slate. I'd be even more interested in forcing it there. So it's something that I think if there's a guy at the end, toward the end of the night that I'm disappointed I didn't get enough of who really burned me, I wouldn't be shocked if it's LaMelo here.
Yeah. For me with LaMelo, once again, just Terry Rozier back, that's going to limit the amount of exposure I want to get to him a little bit. But also because some people are asking for some more contrarian guard plays, at least based on the latest ownership update we got, which I'm going to refresh to see if this is the correct ownership still. Ricky Rubio was projected for almost no ownership, even with news that Darius Garland's out and he's starting in his place. We have sub 10% ownership going to, or no, it's 10% optimized. We don't have the ownership updated on there. Let's see.
Oh yeah.
All right. Refreshing our ownership page to see what Ricky Rubio has. Ricky Rubio is projected for 12% ownership now on DraftKings. Ricky Rubio on FanDuel is projected for 15.5% ownership. So never mind. The ownership update we had 5 minutes ago had him at sub 1%, but no longer the case. But I'll ask you, any guards, Terry, that are picking up, say, sub 10% ownership that you do think make for really strong tournament options today?
So I haven't gotten that ownership update into my sheet here because it works off the one on the boom bust where it's not in there yet. But I mentioned Dante Murray before. I think he's super interesting on this slate. We saw 30.9 minutes in the opener, 26.9% usage, which is a tick up from the 23.1% that he saw last season. Last season, he was a 1.11 fantasy point per minute producer. I think he makes a ton of sense moving between point guard and shooting guard on the FanDuel slate. We've got him projected for 33 and change minutes. I think he's got an opportunity to blow through a pretty nice ceiling score here. We've got him at a 23% boom score probability, one of our more optimal guard plays on the board, and he's coming in with pretty significant positive leverage, one of the highest overall leverage plays on both sites. So I really like getting the shares of Dejounte Murray here. Looking at just some of the other leverage score guys, and I had sorted away from the guard one when we got that other question. So let me try and get back to guards. It's a lot harder to do with all these multi-position guys now. So let's see.
I know it's so that's the other thing too, is because I've been thinking about, because we've always done these shows, position by position, we do live before lock. It's something that Josh started, and I do think it's a really good format for doing these shows. But then we would kind of talk about point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center, and we would use FanDuel as the baseline. And then, if somebody was whatever popped up in that eligibility on DraftKings, would bring up then also. Now it's confusing as shit, because there's guys who it's like, oh, this guy's a power forward on FanDuel, but he's a small forward on DraftKings or whatever. And then and I never know when to talk about guys and which thing. So I'm just kind of going guard, forward, center. I made this decision a little bit as we go, because I just kind of find it hard to talk about a little bit in terms of the exactly position by position. We don't know what position some of these guys are, but that's definitely something we have to adjust to a little bit with the FanDuel change.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely creating some interesting situations in my little dashboard here, and definitely in our lineups. I think I love that they did it. I think it creates a lot of just different interesting scenarios, particularly where we still only get one center. So now the center position becomes, all right, which of these other awesome looking centers are also eligible at power forward? How can I put those different things together? I think it creates some really interesting lineup decisions. So I'm excited that they did it. But as we're sorting through this, I'm just looking for some of the other positive leverage plays at either guard spot. Torrey Craig coming up a little bit positive in terms of the leverage score, but not really a strong optimal lineup rate, not really a strong boom score probability. He's a low usage guy. We saw him get 27.8 minutes the other night in an 8-man rotation. We've got him projected for like 23 tonight. They were talking about expanding that rotation, going a little bit deep. I think they're on the front end of a back-to-back, if I read that tweet correctly. So I'm not wild about that play, but he's a leverage play and he's cheap. So he's easy to get in there, and you can use him as a value play, get over the top. LaMelo is positively leveraged. Jaylen Brown is a small forward and shooting guard on FanDuel. He's got a little positive leverage, just a good player, not coming up extremely optimal, but positive leverage is always good news on a high usage, talented guy like that. So I'm willing to not sweat the optimal rate quite as much on a player like that and just kind of go to him. Similar story with Russell Westbrook, although the usage rate does concern me a little bit there. We saw LeBron and AD kind of up in the high 20s and 30s, their typical usage, and we saw Russ take a major haircut down to 18.5% in the first game. He's a 29.5% usage rate player last season, 1.48 fantasy points per minute. I expect he'll get more usage through the course of the season, but he's probably going to be the guy who defers a little bit more to those other two in terms of taking shots. So I think it does give him a haircut there. But anytime I can get Russ Westbrook with a little positive leverage, I'm willing to at least roll the dice on him in a few spots. I also think he's a little bit underpriced just on talent.
Yeah, I think that is totally reasonable. We do have some questions here in our Discord chat. One of them coming from the Miggy Roberts, and this is a Yahoo-related question. So a good time to bring up that today's show is sponsored by Yahoo. We do have a really good deal going on with Yahoo and the partnership we have with them. If you are new to Yahoo Daily Fantasy and you sign up for their site using the link in the description box below, you get 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum, and that gets you access to all the tools that we have over on Awesemo.com, which includes the FanDuel and DraftKings tools. But of course, we got everything you need to make some money over on Yahoo as well. So if you're new to Yahoo and you want to sign up, use the link in the description box below. And also, Yahoo's been running a ton of contests that have overlay, which is always good value, and DFS is looking for that overlay. But Miggy Roberts' question is, would you prefer Gordon or Mobley on Yahoo? Okay, no, he's changed. He says now Mobley or Porter. That is Michael Porter Jr. for me. Who do you prefer between Evan Mobley and Michael Porter Jr.?
Do not have those guys handy here. Let me see if I can get to that quickly and put them side by side. I doubt it. That's not going to help me. I'm going to say Michael Porter Jr. just in a vacuum there. No, it's because I didn't have everybody selected. That's why. It's multi-position jammed up.
I have a better projection on Porter Jr.
Yeah, I have I would lean into the Porter Jr. side. I was just looking at Mobley. I mean, Alex has him projected with a 36-point FanDuel night, 35 minutes. We had him see 16-ish% usage in the first game. He played almost 40 minutes in that game. If he's getting anywhere near that kind of run in terms of minutes, where he cracks through Alex's projection, I do like that. But I think I just trust the other play a little bit better. I think he's a more proven play.
Yeah, and still waiting on that news on Joel Embiid. He is still questionable to play, game time decision, something we're going to find out later. We did get a Wizards starting lineup: Aaron Holiday, Spencer Dinwiddie, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma, and Daniel Gafford. And for the Oklahoma City Thunder, Isaiah Roby is going to be starting, presumably in place of Derek Favors. Some other questions we have in the Discord chat, and then we'll talk about some of the forwards here. We had a question. Oh no, that was Josh adding me about something else. But Dag is Max is asking, do we like playing Keldon Johnson with DeJounte Murray on FanDuel? I think the bigger issue is that I don't really love Keldon Johnson for this slate, but DeJounte Murray does look under-owned in our tools today.
Yeah, Deontay was a focus play for me. I don't know how much Keldon I got to at all. He wasn't popping up very much in my model. Doesn't look like Alex has very much on him either. He's certainly positively leveraged, but we're talking about a 3-ish% chance of being in the optimal lineup. You do get to move him between power forward and small forward. 3.5% leverage score, or 3.5 leverage score on the DK slate, where you get him for 5,000 instead of 5,900. I don't love the play. 0.85 fantasy points per minute across all situations last year. So 23.6% usage. It was just a tick up from 18.9% last season in the opener. But it's not been a go-to. It's probably because he was a little high priced on the FanDuel slate for what he's giving us here. So maybe if you're playing on DK, I like him a little bit better. You're getting him a little bit more frequently out them, a little bit of leverage over there. FanDuel, I'm not getting to him very much at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, with me, I don't really know exactly what pivots there are to get to from that price point, but I like the DeJounte Murray spot, the Keldon Johnson spot, not as much. It doesn't have to do with them being on the same team. It's just, it's a big slate with a lot of options. And I don't think Keldon Johnson is one of the ideal options for this slate. But moving over to some of the other forwards I do like, there's really 4 forwards that are core players in my lineups today. And that is Josh Giddey, Kyle Kuzma, Michael Porter Jr., who we just mentioned before, and Julius Randle. So Julius Randle, for me, some of the same reasons that I liked him the other day when we were talking about the Knicks game. Not that I expected that game to go in double overtime. Totally lucked out on that part of it. But just the injuries in the Knicks front court. When you don't have Nerlens Noel there, and we just know the Knicks, how they are, no Nerlens Noel or Taj Gibson. And we know that Tom Thibodeau has no hesitation about riding his guys for big minutes. Like we saw Mitchell Robinson played more extended minutes the other day. Well, everybody's minutes look a little bit extended considering the overtime situation. But still, Julius Randle was playing a massive amount of minutes even before that game went to overtime. Randle last year was among the league leaders in minutes, and I think it's going to be the same again this year. A lot of competitive games. He's going to play somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 minutes or so per game, and he's opened up the year much cheaper than he was last year. It's also a favorable matchup for him against the Orlando Magic. So those are the really 4 core forwards for me. I don't really have anybody else who's that highly rostered for me. Everybody else just kind of mixed and matched in. Josh Giddey, Kyle Kuzma, Michael Porter Jr., Julius Randle. Is there anything there you disagree with, or anybody that's a core play for you at forward?
I'm getting to an uncomfortable amount of Kuzma. He's negatively leveraged to a pretty extreme degree on the FanDuel slate as well. One of the more negatively leveraged players that we've got. Comes up a significant amount of the time in the optimal lineup, right? If we're sorting by optimal, I believe he's still our leader on the board, at least as of my last update, but his ownership is outpacing that by a lot. I think it's one where I'm just going to have to eat the chalk and ride with the field on it. There are other forwards that I'm getting to some, like we get Trez Harrell as a power forward on the FanDuel slate for only 100 more than Kuzma. So that's fortunately cutting into some of that, but he's also negatively leveraged. He's coming up less frequently optimal, lower aggregate overall ownership, and a higher projection in terms of just the raw median projection on FanDuel. So I don't mind that as kind of a direct pivot on the same team, but again, he's also getting significant ownership. Similar story with Christian Wood. He's efficiently owned, but I see nice upside there for Christian Wood. So I'm getting a decent amount of him. Looking down, I mentioned I was getting a fair amount of Tobias Harris, another guy who's very negatively leveraged though. So I'm working on getting my my ownership. I'm going to make ownership count a little bit more here in this most recent sort. And I'm going to hope that it's going to yield some more shares of like Domantas Sabonis, who we talked about earlier, and some more shares, let's see, of, I was getting a lot of Kelly Oubre Jr. just because he's got a big positive leverage score on this slate. So I was getting to a decent amount of him at 5,100. So just a couple of the guys in the mix for me right now. No real quibbles with anything that you mentioned. Like I would probably prefer to be getting a little bit more Michael Porter than I am. He's another guy though that is coming up negatively leveraged on the FanDuel slate, negative leverage on the DK slate. But I do like the reasonable chance at a boom score percentage, much higher chance at a boom score on the DK slate, 33% versus on the FanDuel slate, 14 and change. Big price difference across sites. So that probably explained the difference in how much we're getting to him.
Also, for me, I have a significantly higher projection on Michael Porter Jr. than we have over on the site, which is one of the main reasons I'm getting to him. I really like the playmaking role that he showed in the first game of the season. He had 5 assists, which let me see, that might have matched his season high from last year. Yeah, Michael Porter Jr. last year had 5 assists once in a game all season. He opened up the season with 5 assists. So you have to ask yourself, is that an outlier type game for him? Or is it a sign of a developing skill set and a young player who's taking a step forward? I tend to think it's the latter. I think Michael Porter Jr. at just 23 years old was a really well-regarded young player entering the league. I think he's going to take on kind of an all-star type role for the Nuggets this year, especially with Jamal Murray not playing until later in the year, if at all, for Denver. So Michael Porter Jr., I think he's going to have that all-star type season, and I'm trying to get on him early. So Michael Porter Jr., that's one of the reasons that he's really going to be a core play for me. I mentioned Julius Randle there. Is he somebody who's making it into your lineups really?
Yeah, it's another one where just based on a lot of the cheap guys that we're filtering in there, I've found myself having to force it a little bit, but that's one I'm happy to force. I agree with everything that you said about the minutes. It was pretty hilarious just as a Knicks fan the other day wearing a 2013 "We're playing for now." They weren't playing for them Knicks shirt. But yeah, watching the post game with the guys walking off the court, particularly the new guys like Evan Fournier, was like, whoa, this is what it's going to be like. Oh my God. Randall was just like, yep, more of the old same old deal. This is Tibbs. This is how we're going to roll. I think these guys are prepared for a ton of run every single night out. It's just how this team operates. You mentioned the injuries in the front court. I think it's going to push a lot of the focus for those minutes onto Randall. RJ Barrett's going to have to play a prominent role in the offense all throughout this season. Honestly, we saw major strides from him last year. I think we can expect a little bit of improvement throughout this year, at least knock on wood again as a Knicks fan. But I also think that like Obi Toppin coming off the bench could be interesting. We saw him get a decent amount of minutes the other night, play a little bit effectively. And Tibbs tends to like this kid a little bit now. He was hesitant to play him through last year, kind of came on toward the end of the season down the stretch. And now he's going to see a little bit of an uptick in minutes. And I think particularly when there's no Nerlens Noel, no Taj Gibson, I think Obi Toppin might crack through. We've got him projected at 20.9 minutes. If you saw the 24-minute range, I wouldn't be totally shocked. 3,600 on FanDuel, 43 on DK. I think he's got a little bit of value there. I don't think he's somebody to go out of your way for, but if he works his way into a couple of lineups, I wouldn't be totally shocked. And that's kind of how I feel about some of these other Knicks in general. Like Mitch Robinson's the obvious guy to pick up some of those minutes, some of that usage. We saw him get a decent chunk of minutes the other night. 34.5 minutes is a lot for Mitch to play. That game also did go to double overtime. 0.94 fantasy point per minute producer per night. Not a ton of the field going to be on him. I think he's appropriately priced at 5,900 for what he's going to be right now. If we see that old Mitch who's going to be blocking a ton of shots, maybe we see the price go up a little bit. But I like getting to Mitch. I like getting to a few shares of Evan Fournier. I don't know that Derrick Rose is going to see enough run tonight though. But I do like some of these Knicks mixing in. Randall's my favorite here though.
Yeah, and updated ownership, by the way. Julius Randle, 13% ownership on DraftKings, only 6% on FanDuel. He is actually one of our most positively leveraged plays on the slate now, considering the most recent update in ownership, because that is a very low number on Julius Randle, who is actually 6.9% projected ownership on FanDuel compared to an 11.9% chance land the optimal lineup. So he's somebody who I definitely think makes sense as a lower owned GPP play. 6% ownership, much too low on him in my opinion. Any other forwards here that really stand out to you that we should be mentioning before we move over to the centers?
Let me get off the Knicks here and jump back over to, I was just about to paste that in. Easy way for me to answer that question is actually to pull up my crunch over here. Let's see who else we're getting. I mentioned Christian Wood before. He's pricey and he's popular, but I just think there's so much for him to do in that terrible Houston team that he's definitely going to get attention. Aaron Gordon, kind of for similar reasons that you were talking about with Michael Porter. I just think, and it kind of goes to your point about Michael Porter and his developing skill set. I just think that the nature in which that team plays with a willing passer like Jokic in the middle, with a willing passer like Aaron Gordon on the fringes as a power forward, it would be tough for the kid to grow up selfish in that offense. So it kind of makes sense just that he's distributing the ball a little bit more. But I think just for Aaron Gordon purposes, we see him. He's a capable distributor of the basketball as well. I think there's a little bit there tonight. I'm not getting the much of him. He's like a 5% play, but he's somebody I think at least worth calling out here as I'm searching for different power forward answers in a bad version of this sort.
By the way, we have another question here from Jets World in our premium Discord channel is asking, how does Daniel House being back impact the other Houston players? Not much. I think Daniel House, the guy who probably plays like 12 to 14 minutes, isn't going to play a real significant role. So if you like Jalen Green, Kevin Porter, or Christian Wood before you found out that Daniel House is playing, this shouldn't change anything. We're just going to see guys like, maybe Kenyon Martin Jr., Eric Gordon, David Nwaba play a couple less minutes, but all in all, Daniel House, zero impact on those other guys on the Houston Rockets that we had interest in a little bit earlier. Let's move over to the center position. And first of all, we have to start with Joel Embiid. He is currently still questionable to play, and we don't know what the status of him is going to be. And it seems like we're not getting until after lock, which is going to present some interesting pivot options, either to getting Joel Embiid at potentially very low ownership, or maybe slightly reduced ownership on Andre Drummond than we would have had otherwise if Embiid doesn't end up playing. So that's the most popular question coming up in the YouTube and Discord chat is, where's the Embiid news? Where's the Embiid news? We don't control the news. I wish we knew. I don't have that direct line to the Sixers training staff. Also some super chats here. Gene B. Kim, happy Friday, Greg and Terry. We appreciate you. Thanks for watching. And Gene also has been supporting our content for a very long time, and me in particular, dating back to when I worked at Basketball Monster. Abby Schreier's asking, Rozier, Rubio, Dinwiddie, Fournier, Wagner, Durant, Mobley, Crowder, Davis on FanDuel. Any upgrades you could recommend? All right, so
probably.
Yeah.
That was a long list.
Yeah, and the other thing also that's kind of hard is, all right, so Davis, I'm going to assume is Anthony Davis. I didn't really get much exposure to Terry Rozier. I like Ricky Rubio. Is Franz Wagner somebody who made it into your lineups? Because he's not somebody I'm really getting exposure to.
He was coming up a little bit. Still a decent value price. I don't think it's as an extreme value as it was the other day, but I saw him in here a little bit. I can't give you the percentage that I was getting to him, but just as a value play for salary, given the value salary over minutes, basically. That would be the only reason that I would be getting there, though. I wasn't getting much of AD. I forget who the other one was, but I wasn't getting much of him either.
Yeah, and we do have some people saying that Embiid is warming up right now, which, by the way, that is expected. That was the news that Talker said earlier in the day. He said Joel Embiid, game time decision, 50-50. But he said that Embiid was going to warm up, see how he feels during warmups. And if Embiid feels good in warmups, he'll play. If he goes out in warmups and feels a little tight, a little stiff, to hold him out. Keep in mind, 82-game season. Embiid struggled with injuries last year and was definitely hurt in the playoffs as well. So I do think that if there's any reason to think that there's any kind of red flags in pregame, then I think they'll probably end up sitting him. But once again, some people saying that he's in. Don't spread any misinformation. When we know it, we'll know it. But him being out on the court and warming up, that doesn't have any impact on, at least as of now, definitively whether he's going to play or not. But let's talk about other center plays. Most importantly to me, Nikola Jokic. So my two most rostered spend-up options on today's slate, Terry. It is James Harden at guard. It is Nikola Jokic at center. So Jokic today comes in also kind of criminally underpriced, in my opinion, on DraftKings at just $10,200. Over on FanDuel, he's much more expensive at $11,100. Still not a price point that I find to be problematic. I'm overweight to the field on Jokic on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Is he somebody that you like paying up for?
Yes, pretty much in a vacuum, every single slate, I am trying to get to Nikola Jokic shares, particularly when I can only have one center. But I mentioned before, we have the luxury now on FanDuel being able to play multiple guys. Unfortunately, that doesn't apply to being able to play Jokic and Jonas Valanciunas together tonight. Doesn't apply to being able to play Jokic and Embiid or Jokic and Vukovic, which would be ideal in this scenario. But out of all those guys I mentioned, Joe Val getting a lot of ownership, getting a lot of attention, justifiably, I think, for the amount that he's coming up in our lineups. But just in terms of raw scoring ability and star power and everything that we talk about in some of these cases, I think it makes sense to pay that price for Nikola Jokic here. I don't really care on a player like him that he's getting a little bit of negative leverage on the FanDuel slate. I do like the play better where he's basically efficiently owns slightly negative leverage on the DK slate, but it's one of those ones that I'd be willing, if he's going to 18% owned, I'd be perfectly happy getting to 30+% and just pushing past the field on him. If you go even beyond that, I wouldn't really have a quibble with it. It's just that I do think there are a couple other interesting guys at the center position. And if you think about the inverse where, all right, say I want to play three of Montrezl Harrell, Julius Randle, and Domantas Sabonis on the FanDuel slate. Well, I can do that now as well by taking one of those power forwards and putting him in the center spot. So there's give and take to that positional flexibility, but Jokic is a guy I'm always willing to exceed the field for unless he's just egregiously overowned.
Yeah, which to me is not the case today. And something also, there's no real, it's like Spencer Dinwiddie is really popular, but in general, this isn't a slate with any kind of real crazy chalk. And refreshing the latest run of ownership, at least earlier, Spencer Dinwiddie was the only player projected over 30%. And that's still the case on DraftKings. We've got Spencer Dinwiddie projected for 38% ownership. Nobody else in the field is projected over 30. Over on FanDuel, we do have Kyle Kuzma projected for a whole bunch of ownership at 44%. I still think he's a viable play for the slate, but just 44% is a very rich amount of ownership. We've got Spencer Dinwiddie at 38%, Mobley at 34%, but nobody else coming well over 30. So with a slate of this size, it does kind of mute the ownership a little bit outside of the really obvious Dinwiddie play on DraftKings at least. But other center plays here, for me, Montrezl Harrell is somebody else who's a little bit interesting just because he's such a good point per minute fantasy producer. There's also going to be extra usage up for grabs without Bradley Beal there, and also he comes off the bench, but that's not really a massive concern for me. Last game, so first game of the season for the Wizards, Montrezl Harrell's first game with the team. He played 26 minutes. He had a 22% usage rate. He ended up scoring nearly 40 fantasy points in that game. Also something to consider, that game was a blowout. The Wizards absolutely stomped the Raptors. So Montrezl Harrell potentially could have played more minutes in the fourth quarter had that game been closer. So I like getting to Montrezl Harrell today. He's also somebody who has not picked up quite as much ownership as I thought he would with the news of Beal being out. He's still projected for sub 20% ownership on DraftKings. A little more popular on FanDuel, but not crazy. But is Montrezl Harrell somebody you're getting to?
Yeah, very much so. He was in play for me. And like I said, given the switchability between power forward and center on FanDuel, I find that I was getting to a decent amount of him. Just scrolling back over to see what's actually going into FanDuel, I just clicked the upload button on this latest set of lineups. So yeah, Trez is one of my top 10 owned players. I've got a decent amount of them approaching the 50% range. So I'm going to have quite a bit of him. Like I said at the top of the show, I've just got an uncomfortable amount of some of these Washington guys tonight. Not wild about it, but hey, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, with the fake news here in the YouTube chat here, somebody saying that LaMelo Ball is out. LaMelo Ball is not out, but there's no advantage to be gained, right? We're just trying to have fun here. We're trying to talk about basketball, talk about fantasy sports. There's no point where you're going to post some nonsense in the YouTube chat and you're going to gain some any massive advantage for DFS. You'll look like an asshole. Maybe one person will play somebody who's not playing. It's not a big deal, but all right.
It just makes you stand out from the crowd with everybody else playing on the same team, being a bunch of good guys. We're building a community here, all that stuff. So yeah, now we know who you are and that you're kind of an asshole.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who've had the time out there in the show. Now, a couple of super chats here to get to. Darren Anderson, LeBron or Booker for a DK GPP contrarian play. Between those two, I would lean towards LeBron. So I knew there was going to be some kind of sacrifice made in terms of production usage in the Lakers' first game. I thought it was going to be Anthony Davis. Turns out Russell Westbrook was totally uninvolved in the Lakers' game plan, at least in the first game of the season. And that's definitely going to make me hesitant on him going forward until we see something different. But at least for now, with that kind of situation, LeBron didn't seem impacted. Anthony Davis didn't seem impacted. It was just Russell Westbrook. So I'd play LeBron before Devin Booker. Another super chat here from A.V. Schreier, and just trying to make sure I get all these in before we get to lock. He says, does it make sense that Danny Green and Jameson Crowder for FanDuel on 4,230, 900, they lead both teams in minutes? No, I don't think that's the most likely scenario that Danny Green or Crowder lead their teams in minutes. And I'm not rostering either of them today. But Terry, are you rostering Crowder or Danny Green today?
No, not that I know of. They weren't really on my radar, except that I lowered some stuff for Crowder that was remnants from last year so that I wouldn't get him over projected. I was fixing some stuff. Yeah, I don't think we're scoring points for minutes, and those aren't the most productive guys, even when they are getting minutes. So they weren't on the board really for me. On the Booker James question, looks relatively close, but I agree with you. I'm always willing to. The fact that he's LeBron James, I think, would be the trump card in that conversation. Usage is a pretty big advantage, 32% usage for LeBron, only 26% for Booker in the opener. But last year, they were both pretty even, 31 for LeBron, 31.9 for Booker. So it's fairly close. But to me, it's just take the fact that he's LeBron James and run with it.
All right, so we are heading towards lock. And you know what we did not get, Terry? The Joel Embiid news. But you know when we should get the Joel Embiid news? In the next 30 minutes. And the good news is that Terry and I are not going anywhere. We've got a 30-minute show coming up right here. Well, maybe, I don't know if we have to really call it a separate show. It's just an extension of the show. We're going to do 30 minutes, sponsored by Yahoo. And once again, guys, if you are new to Yahoo, sign up in the link in the description box below. And if you make your first deposit over on Yahoo, enter a contest. You get 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum as long as you're a new user of Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. And that'll get you all of the tools, access to everything we have behind the paywall over at Awesemo.com. So really good way to get all the tools that we have that Terry and I use to help build us lineups. Also in the next 30 minutes, here's where you really want to stick around because of that Joel Embiid news. We're going to find out what happens, and neither Terry or I know. So no matter what site you play on, there's going to be information that's going to be relevant to wherever you're playing daily fantasy sports because of the Joel Embiid situation. But let's jump over to Yahoo right now. And we're going to start here by talking about some of the plays on Yahoo that maybe looked a little bit different from the plays on FanDuel or DraftKings. And then any questions that anybody has related to Yahoo or the slate in general, you add us in the Discord chat or anybody leaves super chats. We'll be answering them regardless of what those are. But Terry, do you have Yahoo pulled up right now?
I have what do I have pulled up here? This is, I think, the single game slate so far, but I can jump over to the other one real quick here, and I'll be ready.
Yeah, so we're also going to be talking about the single game slate, the game later tonight, and we'll talk about that towards the end. We're talking about the late night hammer, which is that matchup is the Los Angeles Lakers against the Phoenix Suns. We're breaking down that game as well. So Yahoo pulling over, and also we have ownership projections for Yahoo over at Awesemo.com. And one thing that really stands out here, Derek White on Yahoo is projected to be in 54% of lineups. Now, the reason that Derek White is a vastly different play on Yahoo than he was on FanDuel or DraftKings, he's min price. He is $10. So that made Derek White a way different looking play over on Yahoo. And Spencer Dinwiddie is somebody who is $22 and becomes a little bit more of a contrarian option relative to Derek White just because of the difference in salary. But Derek White at $10, is that somebody who you just feel like you would have to be playing? Keep in mind that game doesn't lock until later.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I mentioned White earlier when we were talking about, I think it was DraftKings as a potential move if you didn't want to pay up for Dejounte Murray when we were talking about getting off of Dinwiddie. He was a little bit cheaper on that site. And the fact that you can get him on Yahoo at $10, that's dynamite. That's a bit of a misprice. That's definitely something I would want to be a part of. It's a guy that we know is going to see a significant role in the offense. So yeah, I'm excited to get to that one. I can pull him up here real quick. Derek White. There he is. Not Hassan Whiteside. Yeah, White was 0.95 fantasy point per minute producer last season. He only saw 16.9% usage in the opener, but he was a 22.3% guy last season. Saw 30 minutes in the opener. He's at 30. We've got him projected for 32.4 minutes. So I like him to go over a little bit over what we did. He was coming up in significant amounts of the optimal lineups on the other sites. So I imagine, yeah, for that kind of a discount, he would be a supremely optimal play on the Yahoo slate.
Yeah, that's an all-in play for me. I don't really care that he's going to be in over 50% of lineups. The only way he really fails is maybe like an injury. Outside of that, it's hard for me to see Derek White missing at $10. Some other plays were really popular over on Yahoo include Kyle Kuzma at $15, Montrezl Harrell at $11. It is pretty interesting to me to see that Spencer Dinwiddie only $22 over on Yahoo. That is something that makes him look, a lot different than he does over on FanDuel and DraftKings, just because we see the lesser ownership going there. But what would you make of guys like, that game is actually already locked, the Washington game. So I guess we don't really have to talk about it from a Yahoo standpoint, but we could compare pay up options. We got Nikola Jokic is $48 on Yahoo, James Harden $44. Like I said, on FanDuel and DraftKings, those were my two favorite pay-up options. No difference for me over on Yahoo. I think between James Harden and Nikola Jokic, I would lean towards Harden at a $44 salary. That's just too cheap for a guy with the acumen of James Harden. Went over all the numbers that he has last year when Kyrie Irving was off the court. So James Harden at $44, once again, he becomes the primary pay-up option for me. But Terry, if you're building one lineup on Yahoo and you had to choose between Jokic and Harden, which one do you think you'd go to?
That's tough because I really like both players on this slate. I would be making as much of an effort as I could, honestly, to have both of those guys in this lineup because you do have the util spot on Yahoo. So you can move around. You can roster a second center. You can go to one of the cheap centers in the util spot if you wanted to do that. And you've got the point guard, shooting guard as well. So I think there's enough flexibility with some of the discounts we've already talked about where I'd be shooting for both of them. But if I had to gun to my head, choose one, I think it's going to be Harden here. And that pains me to say because I really love getting to Jokic, but I think it's Harden here just for the major uptick in the assists that we talked about, everything that we talked about when Kyrie's not on the floor that James Harden gets. It's going to see significant run. I think that's probably the right decision, and you pay a little bit less for him.
All right, we did get a super chat here from Markin Tonio May, who's saying Time Lord or Michael Porter Jr. on FanDuel now that Horford's active. That is Michael Porter Jr. for me in a landslide. Also, I really like Robert Williams. However, he just played a massive amount of minutes the other day in that double overtime game for Boston. Al Horford's coming back. Horford's going to be on the slight minutes restrictions, expected to play 20 to 25 minutes for Boston today. But I still think that cuts into Robert Williams a little bit because where are those minutes coming from? He's not taking away from Jason Tatum. He's not taking away from Jaylen Brown. Two big men that are going to overlap in minutes a little bit. So I do like Robert Williams a little bit less with Horford in the mix. So it is Michael Porter Jr. for me over Time Lord. How about you?
Yeah, I can agree with that just because we've got Horford in the mix taking some of his minutes away. He's a guy he's got to be out on the floor to really rack up the monster scores that we want from him. 1.36 fantasy points per minute. There's no arguing with that. He just needs the minutes. So I agree with getting Horford in the way, which is a shame because this kid should just see a little bit more time than Time Lord. But yeah, I agree with you.
All right. Still no update on Joel Embiid. That game starts in 24 minutes and nothing happening there. We did get the Nets starting lineup. And I thought there was a chance we could see a different Nets starting lineup for this game after they struggled in game one. And the Nets were a team that kind of mixed around starting big men a lot last year. But James Harden, Joe Harris, Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin, and Nick Claxton. So the same starting five for the Nets over there. But now scrolling through some of the salaries, here's one player that's vastly different on Yahoo compared to FanDuel and DraftKings. That's Chris Duarte. He's only $11, and he's somebody who had an excellent first game of his career. He was making all of his shots. I think he finishes with 27 points, knocked down well over half his threes in that game. And he was priced well up on FanDuel and DraftKings, not on Yahoo, where he's only $11. So if you're looking to potentially make a lineup that doesn't consider Derek White, or if you want to go superstars and scrubs, I think it makes sense to have lineups that have both Chris Duarte and Derek White in them. With Duarte at $11, is he somebody who would look really appealing to you as a tournament option over on Yahoo?
Yeah, again, that's another great price. Just given the discount there, I think it makes a ton of sense. We saw him get 32.7 minutes in the opener. We've got him projected at 27.2 tonight. So a 5-minute haircut in the minutes. 21.5% usage in the opener. He turned that into, like you were saying, 27 points on 9 of 15 shooting, 6 of 9 from 3, 5 rebounds, an assist, a steal. I mean, he filled the stat sheet pretty decently. A lot of it had to do with the solid shooting night that he had, but there's no reason to expect that he can't have some kind of a facsimile of this game. If you take into account that maybe it's 5 minutes less, maybe he misses a few of those shots, it brings it down a little bit in terms of where we'd want him. I think the other sites probably priced him up to the right level compared to where they had him the other day. With Yahoo leaving him at a discount, I think it makes absolute sense. You're still very likely to get more production than that salary indicates. So I like that play. All
right, we got the news. Joel Embiid will be playing today. So with that news coming at 7:08, so that game starts in 22 minutes. I think Joel Embiid's a really strong tournament play. He's going to be in less than 5% of lineups, maybe even 1 or 2% of lineups because this news came out so late. I'm just going to refresh our ownership page and see what we had projected for him. But I know it wasn't a very significant number even before this. Embiid was 2% over on DK. On FanDuel, Embiid was at, it would help if I could spell his name right when I'm doing a search here, 3% over on FanDuel. On Yahoo, we have Embiid projected at 4% at $47. So what are you going to be doing now that we know that Joel Embiid is going to be, and this is confirmed information, Woj reported, this isn't, Monkey Nuts 77 in the YouTube chat. This is the Adrian Wojnarowski, also the news god himself, who posts all the information that we get in our Discord channel. What are you going to be doing with Joel Embiid now that we know that he's playing?
I just pulled my lineups that I put into FanDuel out of FanDuel, and I'm going to try and late swap a few more shares of Joel Embiid into this thing. Like I said earlier, I was trying to force him in, and I got to some of them. Hopefully, it's probably like around what the field would come up with. So I want to turn that into more than the field is going to have. So I'm going to be a little bit aggressive about putting him into this crunch now, and I'll do that as we're talking. But yeah, I think that's, if the field's going to be trailing a player like that, I'm happy to get there. I liked him going into this slate. And now that we know for sure after lock that he's going to be in there with only 20 minutes to spare, it's definitely a crunch time kind of a move. But yeah, we got to get more shares of Embiid where we can.
Yeah, that's I'm going to be trying to force him in a little bit here as well. Still maybe a little bit concerns about knee soreness. So I'm not going and trying to get Embiid in like 40% of my lineups or anything. But if I could get to like 10 to 15% of Joel Embiid when he's projected to be, in the neighborhood of 2-3% by the field, a number which, by the way, could end up being even lower than what we have projected. It's always hard to adjust for those kind of late sort of situations. I certainly think he's somebody we want to be overweight to. Really strong GPP play. So that is something that I'm doing right now, is updating my lineups, my Joel Embiid exposure. Is there anybody else who you look at from the Sixers as being a stronger or weaker play now that we know that Joel Embiid is going to be playing?
So I don't know that it gives a major haircut to Tobias Harris, who was the guy that I was next most interested in that spot. Obviously, we're not going to Andre Drummond now and knock Drummond back down to backup minutes and take him off the board. I don't think there's anything really to talk about there. In terms of other guys on the court that are going to take a haircut, not really. I guess it would probably come at a little bit of expense of, if you were thinking in terms of if you projected this game for Joel Embiid being out and you gave Tobias Harris more usage, maybe you strip that back away from him. There was nobody else in this game that I was really overextending for. Like, it didn't suddenly make somebody else on the board outside of Andre Drummond a really, really interesting play. It would have just kind of nudged Tobias Harris. It might have nudged some of the other guys that are upward of 30 minutes, like the guards that are going to be out there, like a Seth Curry maybe takes a couple more shots. But now that we're not doing that situation, I didn't really go out of my way to project for him being out. So there's not much to do here. But if you did, I would start unwinding some of those changes.
Yeah, that's let's see, what could I get to? And now it's now I'm looking at it, and it's because I ran a crunch and I wasn't getting to as much Embiid as I would have liked to. But here we go. All right, 20% Joel Embiid for me. That's a number I could live with. We're gonna save this. Let's upload this guy back in here, and all right, there we go. Now we've got I've got a set of lineups with what I think should be a good GPP play in Joel Embiid that should certainly differentiate lineups here. Let's see, what are
just in general, since some of the pricing crosses over too, because a lot of those centers are at similar relative prices on Yahoo. What does that do to your other center shares that you already had booked? Because I had like a ton of Joe Val in there, I had a ton of Nikola Jokic in there, both of whom their games haven't started yet. We also have Vooch in there, whose game hasn't started yet. So a lot of the shares I was looking to push for Embiid came out of those three guys. Or is that kind of the similar story for you?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I was kind of listening, but I'm also trying to make sure my lineups are up.
Yeah, no, so that's why I was trying to stall. The new shares that you're getting to from Embiid came from somewhere in terms of who you were rostering otherwise at center. Where did those shares come from? Like, who are you getting less of at the center spot?
I got to a little bit. I didn't have a ton of them, but I have a few less Vucevic lineups. I have less of Christian Wood. Actually, I got to a little bit less Randall now, which maybe I'm a little upset about because he has center eligibility on DraftKings and FanDuel. So yeah, those being the preeminent ones: Randall, Vucevic, and Christian Wood.
I'm glad you said the name Randall because he was coming out of mine as well, and that is definitely not something that I want. So I'm going to correct that one here too. Oh wait, did that game start already? That game started already. He didn't come out of mine.
Okay, so never
I guess
mind.
I just didn't have as much of him as I wanted. Shit. Oh well.
What? Yeah. So it wasn't Randall that it came from. Yeah, I guess it was just Vucevic and Christian Wood, but I thought I had over 20% Randall, and now I'm at 15%. So maybe I just had a little bit less than what I thought I had. But all right, that aside, I think we've covered all the Sixers news here. If anybody has any questions, actually, here's something I think that is relevant. A lot of people are bringing up Andre Drummond in the YouTube chat. I have no interest in Andre Drummond, and I think that people are going to. I think there's people who have Andre Drummond in their lineups, assuming Embiid was going to be out, that are not going to swap off of Andre Drummond. I think he's a very poor play now. Maybe something crazy happens where Embiid gets hurt, but I'm not banking on that. I think we're going to see Drummond go over-owned now, considering the late news here. But no interest in Drummond for me. I assume the same for you.
Yeah, none at all. It would take him out of the player pool almost entirely. It's not, he's going to see 15 minutes tonight. He's a guy who produces monster per minute numbers, but in the end, you do need a certain amount of minutes for him to put up a Slate relevant score. I don't see him getting there.
All right, some questions in our Discord chat as people are updating the lineups. IRM is asking, what do you think of Roby as the last man in? And now that we know that Isaiah Roby's starting, not a primary play for me, but I don't mind getting some exposure to him if that's the last spot in your lineup. I'm not saying you have to change Isaiah Roby. He is viable in that sort of situation. We have Jets World is asking best ceiling and points per dollar projection on DK between Jonas Valanciunas, Nikola Vucevic, or Christian Wood. If it's just points per dollar and we're not talking about anything else other than that, it is Christian Wood for me. But how about for you? Those names were Jonas Valanciunas, Christian Wood, and Nikola Vucevic.
And which site was it? Sorry.
This was for DraftKings.
Might be. Is it Joe Val over there? What's Christian Wood's salary over there? 71, 70. I guess it's Christian Wood because he's $100 cheaper. So if we're talking points per dollar, it's Christian Wood squeaking by because he's a little bit cheaper than Joe Val. But I've got those guys right next to each other on the board here.
All right, let's go over to some prop bets now. And if you guys haven't used some of the new tools, particularly Odd Shopper, over at Awesemo.com, we have some really cool ways to bet on NBA player props, also for NFL player props, but NBA being the one we're talking about right now, where you could go over to Odd Shopper on Awesemo, and you could sort all of the odds available across all sports books that are legal in your state, and you can find the best ROI bets that exist out there. It's a really useful tool to find where the best value is, because even if you're looking at your sports book, it's kind of hard to identify which individual props to look at. There's a million of them. There's points, rebounds, assists for each player that exists. And one thing that's really nice about being able to use Odd Shopper is it'll find across all books that are available in your state which ones have the best available lines. So I'm going over there right now and seeing that with the latest lines that have been updated while we were doing the show, which ones stand out the most, and also kind of trying to find out which players are from which are from players who have not already started their games. All right. So it looks like is there really a book that has over under 10.5 points for Terry Rozier? Because that is an egregious line if that is the case.
That's the top of the board that I just pulled up with a 90% expected win probability and 84% ROI on that bet. That's pretty solid.
Yeah, so Terry Rozier, who I have projected to score about 18 points today, and maybe a little risk involved because he's coming back from an injury, but if your book if you could, I'm not sure if we're allowed to. I should have asked this before. If we're allowed to say the names of individual sports books on the shows, just because that's something that is sometimes frowned upon in the YouTube algorithm. So we can't say what the individual books are. Maybe we could going forward. But if you go over to Odd Shopper, you could find that there is a book that has a 10.5 over under for points for Terry Rozier. And that is something that I have the over hitting well over the time, as does our projections. Also, the way that these odds work in terms of our projected win percentage or expected ROI, it comes from our DFS projections, the ones that Alex and a lot of the other guys behind the scenes work on. They do all the minutes projections, usage for all the players. We use that information and just compare it to some of the odds over at sportsbooks to identify where the best value is. And then using that, we can find the actual expected return on placing some of these individual bets. But Terry Rozier, that over 10.5 points number, if that's a line available to you, that is about as close to a lock as you're going to see in sports betting. Which ones kind of stand out to you here, Terry?
Yeah, so jumping back over there, the way I like to look at it is, kind of look at the expected win percentage and have the expected ROI right next to that, like we've got it on the site here on the betting tool. And then you hop over to OddsShopper and you can poke around with the different things that we've got set up there with the e-commerce setup. And if you're looking for that Terry Rozier bet, it should be like 3 clicks away to find which book Greg's talking about there, because we've got it set up where you just click, all right, what type of bet do I want? What player do I want? Am I looking for the over? And it'll pop it right up in front of you, tell you exactly where to bet it. So just going down the board here by some of the expected win percentage, seeing points and under points bet on Anthony Davis for 24.5. We've got that as a 71% expected win probability with a 105 line and a 46% ROI. So I like the under there. That wasn't something that I necessarily would have had my eye on without the tool, because I just figure Anthony Davis, like that's a somewhat reasonable, just top of my head kind of a number. But Alex has him projected for 21.1 real life points. It's a 24.5 point line with a plus plus odds on it. I like that bet. I think that's a solid spot there.
So here's something about Anthony Davis, and I think the points make sense. I actually like the under on the rebounds more. His rebounds you can find at 8.5. And so with Anthony Davis, while I'm not exactly sure what the usage is going to look like with Russell Westbrook in the picture, it looks like his usage was at least okay on opening day, obviously subject to change going forward. Also something to consider. It's a really tough matchup for them against the Phoenix Suns tonight. Anthony Davis did pull down 11 rebounds on opening night. However, they started DeAndre Jordan at center. Supposedly that's going to be the plan going forward. That makes no sense to me. I think that's absolutely batshit crazy. But that starting lineup, not only with DeAndre Jordan in the mix, who he's still capable of rebounding. He's going to take rebounds away from Anthony Davis. Even if Russell Westbrook isn't going to be as involved in the Lakers offense as he was last year with the Wizards offense, he's going to pull down rebounds. And I think ultimately that's going to hurt some of the counting stats for Anthony Davis. So under 8.5 rebounds, that's something that I placed a bet on. And that's something that I certainly think makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That's another solid one. And you gave all pretty solid reasons there. And I think just a major question mark with that team is just going to be the impact of Russ Westbrook from not only through the course of the season, just from night to night. He's the kind of guy that Russ might go out playing pissed off one day and just say, hey, I'm going to score a bunch of points. Hey, I'm going to pass the ball. Hey, I'm going to get a triple double. That's just Russ gets triple doubles at will, but he needs to take the ball out of the hands of two very dominant kind of players to do so. I think that's going to come up from time to time, and I think it's going to be a dice roll with these guys throughout the course of the year, unless we see something really firmly shake out and be really consistent over the course of a pretty decent sample here.
Yeah, so I'm scrolling through the odds. Also, something about, because when we originally planned the show, we were kind of coming up with ideas like, all right, how do we do a betting odds segment? How to do the player props? And one thing that is hard about submitting these ahead of time is the lines move a lot. So it's a thing where it's like, all right, do I really want to have Tyler working behind the scenes, come up with some sort of graphic for player props, only to find out as we start the show that none of that exists anymore. So it's something that unfortunately Tyler's able to go with the flow and figure out what we're doing on the fly. But most of the numbers that I looked at before the show had started no longer exist. So also kind of looking at this and trying to figure out what projects well compared to Alex's projections as we do this. But Terry, is there any other number that really stands out to you from a game that hasn't started yet?
I was just clicking around the board to just explore some of the different props that we've got on assists, on rebounds. So I landed on the assists one, and I love when Alex comes up with wacky ones like this in the numbers here. Derek Favors, over a half an assist. We've got him projected for 0.62. It's a 47% win probability with a 44% ROI. So if you're going by ROI, it's our third highest ROI bet on the assists board. It's under half the time it's going to come in as a win, but it's got a nice little ROI on it, and he's only got to get one for you. So that's just a weird one that kind of popped out as you were talking about it. I was clicking back and forth between games that haven't started yet, and the two that were on the the Denver game hasn't started yet, right?
No, Denver game isn't until later.
Yeah. So above him, you get Aaron Gordon on the assist prop, a little bit more of a normal one, 2.5 on the line. We've got him a 67% win probability going over that one. Alex has him projected for close to 3.5. It's a 46% ROI, so you're gaining a little bit of points on the ROI on that one. You're gaining a significant amount on the probability of it coming in, so I like that one better.
All right, so we're going to talk about the single game contest for tonight. We've got the one game slate between the Lakers and the Suns. I want to hit on that a little bit, but first we do have some more questions to hit on in our premium Discord channel. We've got Jets World is asking Roby or Giddey on DK. That is Giddey for me. I love Giddey tonight. Roby is just the guy who, if the salary works, it's okay to play him. Giddey is somebody I actively targeted for this slate, but Roby or Giddey, do you have a preference there, Terry?
I was getting to a weird amount of Roby because something I think is broken in my model on him. So I had to make some adjustments and he fell kind of out of the pool for me. So I'm not sure where it would have come down. I wasn't getting a ton of Giddey on the FanDuel slate, but he looks a lot better on the DK slate where he was priced at 4,100. He's 53 on the FanDuel slate. Not sure in front of me what the Yahoo price is on him, but I think for DK purposes, I think it would be Giddey there.
Yeah, that's it's Giddey in a landslide for me. I don't have them projected remotely close to each other. IRM in our premium Discord chat is asking for a DK single entry, Embiid and Barnes, Embiid, Barnes / Roby, or Pirtle and Anthony Davis. So Embiid and which Barnes? I assume he means
Harrison?
Scotty Barnes, or could be Harrison Barnes. It is tough when there's multiple. It's like the other day I'm doing a football show and somebody said, "Should I play? Do you like Williams today?" Like there's a million Williamses.
Yeah,
so
that does not work. The Boston game started. That's why I went Harrison. The Toronto Boston.
Okay, game. Yeah, that actually makes a whole lot of sense. So Embiid and Harrison Barnes or Pirtle. Yeah, that's the Embiid side for me. I think Embiid's a really strong GPP play, especially for single entry when you consider he's going to have such low ownership in that kind of situation. Looks like we have all of those questions answered. Now, just a few minutes left until we wrap up for the show. But first, want to talk about some of the single game contests that are available over at Yahoo, which are also available on wherever you play DFS. Some of the single game sites, Yahoo's really trying to grow their single game product. So I think you guys should go check that out. Also, something that if you sign up for an Awesemo membership, or if you get the free membership via signing up for Yahoo, you get all the projections we have for Yahoo. But tonight's featured game between the Lakers and the Suns. Let's start with the pay up options. We have LeBron James, Russell Westbrook, and Anthony Davis. If you're only playing one of these guys, Terry, in a single game contest, who would be your preferred pay up choice?
So we talked about the hit that Russ took on the minutes, or on the usage rather, and I think we've kind of got to go with what we saw. For me, it's just going to be LeBron. I think that's the easy answer here. 32% usage in that opener, 36.7 minutes. It's LeBron James. He's a 1.41 fantasy point per minute producer last season across all situations. Alex has him projected for 35 minutes of action tonight. I see no reason to really mess around with getting to one of the best players of all time here. I'm happy to put him in the megastar spot or the superstar spot. I think he should probably go into one of those two.
Yeah, so I don't have any kind of issue with that. LeBron James is my top choice. I will say this, people might totally be scared off of Russell Westbrook, and I think that kind of makes him an interesting tournament option for a one-game slate. I didn't play him on the main slate, but at least for a one-game option, Russell Westbrook, do we want to totally discount his fantasy potential based on one game, based on what we've seen from him in the past? I'd say probably not. Once again, not something I want to put my money on for a main slate, but for a single game contest, I think Russell Westbrook's kind of a interesting contrarian choice there. Now, our guy Neil Orfield too. Neil, I know that Neil has been winning all the money in the world in the NFL streets, but he works with us now. You don't need to leave us super chats and give us money. But Neil Orfield is asking, who the fuck is Herbert Jones? Herbert Jones, who was just recently announced as a starter. He is starting in place of Josh Hart for the Pelicans. Josh Hart was ruled out. So Herbert Jones, I am not super opinionated on him. He's not someone I'm going to be getting into my lineups today. But Herbert Jones, let's see what data we could pull up on him. Herbert Jones is I'm not going to expect that he plays a whole bunch of minutes. Let's see his preseason numbers. He played fairly okay, I guess, in terms of preseason. He played 20 minutes per game in preseason, scored 16 fantasy points, which it doesn't really wow me, from a points per minutes standpoint. But I find it unlikely he's going to play well beyond 20 minutes. As somebody just based on he scored less than a fantasy point per minute in the preseason, I'm going to assume he scores less than a fantasy point per minute now that he's actually competing against regular NBA starters. So Herbert Jones, somebody I think we could pretty comfortably not roster today. But do you have any crazy strong opinions on Herbert Jones just for our guy Neil?
No, we came to a fork in the road of what we had researched there, and you went in the right direction. I went in the wrong direction. I went to what he's done and what he did in the opener, and he played 3.3 minutes and did not put up a single other stat. So he was out there. He was a +6 while he was out there, but did not do anything. No points, no rebounds, no assists. Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. He was a preseason player. If he shows us something here, maybe we'll talk about him in the future, but I don't really have much on him, to be honest.
All right, so that pretty much does it for us. Before we finish, Terry, which player is most likely to ruin your night today, and why is it Herbert Jones?
Well, now it is. It's probably going to be one of the Wizards. Whichever one I own the most is probably going to be the one that goes pop out of Kuzma, out of Trez Harrell, and out of Spencer Dinwiddie. Whichever one I've got the most is the one I'm most concerned about, but I'm concerned about all three.
All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done it already, on the way out, hit the like button. We've been on here for a while. Hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to have all kinds of content coming up for all DFS sports tomorrow. And also, I'm just trying to throw off Tyler with it. This is one of my favorite things to do, is just try to throw off cadence as we're about to close the show, so Tyler doesn't know when to actually end it. But listen, we're on my time now. We don't have shows going on after this. And also, I do have my mom's birthday to get to, so I know she's not watching. But happy birthday, Mom! And for real, good luck today, guys.
Happy birthday to Greg's mom. Come on.